Hello everybody, and welcome to what is probably going to be a very different video. Well, I know it's going to be a very different video, and it's going to be a very long video. I've had a few comments here and there with people being excited for longer videos, so here's your challenge video to see if you really want long videos. What I've decided to do is to go through all of my past Beetlejuice videos and pull out all the portions where I'm building with foam board to create the Beetlejuice house. During the creation of this house, it's been kind of scattered throughout. I've done some building and then some decorating and then furniture, dolls, and then back to building. So it can be a little bit difficult to find every single step I've done to create the house. And because I am chopping up the videos and trying to make one cohesive video now that the house is actually built, you may have some instances of the music cutting in or out weird, or you'll jump to a section of the house being decorated and I never really explained how I did it. However, along the way, I am going to put the thumbnail of the video, the title of the video, and the release date. So if you do want to go back and find the videos that are in between those foam board builds, you can go to my playlist and kind of locate what you're looking for. I'm also going to be adding chapters to this video, so it's a bit easier to kind of find the information that you're looking for since it will be so long. And I know me just talking right now is making it even longer. Sorry. But I'm really wanting this to be a resource for anyone who does want to build a foam board dollhouse so that the information I've put out there is all in one place. One last thing before we get started, I am not going to be including the planning video, so that is going to be the first video that I link down below. If you are starting a project like this, I highly suggest that you go through the planning process. You will see me reference back to my planning multiple times throughout the building of the foam board house. I highly suggest it. So if you are going to start something like this, definitely watch the planning video as well. So without further ado, here we go. Good luck, and I'll see you at the end. Time to build this thing. I decided a while ago that I was going to scratch build the entire thing. So technically this is going to be my first scratch built dollhouse. Really from scratch. I'm choosing foam board because, well, as of right now, May 2021, wood is astronomically expensive. Also, foam board is lighter, it's easier to cut without having major tools, and I'm just more comfortable with working with foam board than I am wood. However, foam board's not as strong as wood, and so that's why I have the wood dowels. I'm hoping to kind of intersperse some wood columns in the foam board walls. And that way, kind of like the structure of a cake where you have a multi-tiered cake, they put those dowels in the center to help support the next level. That's my thought process. So I'm going to do foam board and then dowel. I'm going to intersperse the foam board and the dowels, and these are going to be my interior wood columns that help support the next level. That way there's not just a ton of weight sitting just on the foam board. Without further ado, let's get started. As I said, I am going to be referring back to my floor plans I made in the previous Beetlejuice video, and these are safely tucked away in my dollhouse workbook. You can also find out more about that below in the description box if you might be interested. These are my first, second, and third floor plans, but today I'm only going to be dealing with the first. The first thing I want to do is cut out the base of the first floor. To do this, I'm going to simply be counting the boxes on my plan. Each box equals 1 inch, which makes this pretty easy to map out. Before I start adding any of the intricacies, which is the weird shape that makes up this base, I'm going to make the extreme width and the extreme depth of the project. This means I'm using a very sharp craft knife to cut out the square that encompasses everything. From that point, it's going to be a lot easier for me to draw out the insets and all the different shapes that make up this base piece. I noted earlier that I'm using a sharp craft knife for this, and the reason I said that is because when it comes to foam, you're going to have to change your blade a lot. It does dull really quickly, and once it starts to dull, it will start tearing at the edges of your foam board. So what you see here is a very sharp knife cutting through foam board, and also make sure you're being careful with where you store this and keep it away from children and pets. You'll also notice that I'm cutting twice. The first time is going through the first layer of the paper that covers the foam, and then the second is going all the way through the foam and through the bottom layer of paper. And I found that that works really well for me. Not trying to cut through the entire thickness of the foam board the first time helps me concentrate, go slowly, and I end up with better cuts that way. Now that I've meticulously cut out the bottom floor or base, I am going to glue it to another piece of foam board. The reason for this is it's going to give it a double thickness, so it'll be stronger, and it will also take care of this slight warp that is happening in the foam board. I tried to pick up the flattest foam board that I could find in the bunch, but it just seems to be one of those things that comes with foam board, is constantly fighting this curve. One of the ways I can fight that curve is take another piece that's curved in the opposite direction and glue them together. So hopefully they kind of cancel each other out and I end up with a flat base. What I'm going to do is line this up in the corner and then glue it down, put something extremely heavy on top so that the glue has plenty of time to take hold and hopefully hold everything flat. Then I can take my X-Acto blade and then just carefully go along the edges and cut through, so then I end up with a double thick base. To prepare my work surface, I'm removing my cutting mat because I want to make sure what I'm gluing down sits on a completely flat surface. I also marked the word top on the top of my base so that I don't get things mixed up. I'm adding a large amount of glue. This is PVA glue. I'm using Elmer's glue just because I have a lot of it, but any PVA glue should work. Then I'm just going to use a scrap of foam board and I am spreading it out all over the entire surface. So I just had to be mindful of that before I glued it onto the other piece, that there was wet glue all over the entire surface. Looking back at my footage, I'm not quite sure I got the opposite warp correct. When I was putting these down, I was getting confused between holding the board upside down covered in wet glue and then grabbing another board. And so I think their warp is going the same way, but it ended up working out. I just made sure to put something very heavy on top. This is books. You don't want anything that's pointy because it could mar the face of your foam board. So you want something flat and heavy. A lot of craft books is great for this purpose. It will hold it down and make sure that it dries the way you want it to dry. I let these pieces sit for a good 3 to 4 hours before I took the weights back off, and then I carefully went around using, again, a sharp craft knife to cut through the edges, trying to stay as close to the original base as possible. This way I had a double thickness and I didn't have to redraw out the base. I could just use the top piece as a template. Once I was done with that, I put it straight back under the books so that it could continue to dry overnight, because I don't believe the interior was completely dry at the 5-hour mark. I took it off my workspace so it could dry off to the side and I could work on some other things. It's day 2. And today I need to make some walls. Yesterday, all I finished was the base. Literally, that's all I did. A lot of other stuff was going on. But today I'm going to be trying to make the walls in bulk. I'm going to be doing it similar to the way I did the practice model, where I'm just going to be making a bunch of pieces that are all the correct thickness, and I can just cut the walls as I go. I know all my walls need to be 9 inches tall, so hopefully that will at least get me started. I'm also going to be figuring out the magnet system today. Hopefully find a way to make that work so that I can use that idea in my project. So let's make some walls. Making the walls is going to be very similar to the way I made the base. I'm just measuring out 9 inches all the way across my foam board, and that will be the height of all my walls. I'm carefully cutting through the foam board, making sure I keep the blade up and down as much as possible so that it's straight across. Then I can use the piece I just cut off as my template to continue to make 9-inch walls. I'm just going to move it up my foam board using my pencil to trace it out, and that way I don't have to keep using my ruler, and it makes it much quicker and easier. I am again going to make them a double thickness, so I'm taking 2 pieces and I'm first looking at how they're warped to try and find the opposite warp. And then I'm adding glue and spreading it out with a scrap piece of foam board, making sure to get all the way to the edges and the corners. Then I'm just going to put the foam board on top, weigh it down, and this is going to make us some walls. I ended up making 3 of these just to start out with. I don't want to make too many because I don't want to waste my foam board in case I don't need them, but this definitely got me started and I have plenty to go on for a while. Maybe not enough for the entire first floor, but enough for this first video. All right, now that I have the base cut and I have at least one wall dry. I flattened it so it's very straight and ready to become a wall. Now it's time to commit to the project and really figure out what walls are going to be permanent, what is going to be removable, and like this is the hard part. I'm gonna pull out my model and hopefully that will be a little bit of inspiration to me to try and figure out what I want to be able to see. The walls that are going to be permanent are going to be the easiest to install first because literally I'm just gluing a wall onto the base. Some of the walls have to be there for the thing to stand up. So, okay, what I'm going to do, I've decided. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go around my model and I am going to put an X on the walls I want to be removable. That way I can know what I'm doing. Okay, it's going to be easier for me to put an X on the walls that are staying. We'll try that. The front door wall, X, front door wall, staying, permanent, not removable. One wall. I got one wall. Okay, I'm gonna turn the camera off and think about it and ponder and we'll figure it out. I will do a close-up in a second, but I put red X's on all the walls that I want to stay in place permanently. The other walls are going to be removable so you can look inside that room. I think I'm happy with what I came up with. I'll do a close-up in a second so you can see. All the interior walls are going to be permanent for sure. It's just trying to get the views from the other parts of the house. The other thing I have to consider is the second floor. There's some walls that continue up, so I have to think, do I want the entire 2 floors of walls to be removable or just one floor? So I'm going to start on the back of the house and also on the interior walls because those are walls I am more sure of. And so, okay, enough. Let's do it. I know you're probably already sick of looking at this plain white foam board and the floor plan, but I am going back and forth between this a lot as a reference because I already did all of my thinking on this sheet of paper, so now I just have to translate it to my foam board. I'm again counting squares to know how many inches I need to draw my lines out, and this is going to help me locate my interior walls. Because I know all the interior walls are going to be permanent, this makes this a great place to start. I also made sure to include this rectangle in the center because it's going to house a lot of the electrical eventually when I add lights. So this is the first wall I'm focusing on. It is, I think it's the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. I'm marking out how long it needs to be on the foam board, but then I am going to subtract 2 thicknesses of this wood dowel and then cut the foam board there. That's because each end of the wall I'm going to attach one of these dowels. This goes back to what I said in the beginning about making everything a little bit stronger with the dowels. And I did want to show you I can cut through these with my easy cutter tool that I use all the time. The method I use is I just continually turn it, making deeper and deeper cuts on all the sides until it eventually goes through. I'm cutting carefully through. I think I've already changed my blade once, and I'm just going to continue to change the blade in my knife to make sure I get nice clean cuts. Here you can see the dowels on either side of the wall, and then I'm going to double check that I still have the correct length for the interior wall by putting it back on my base. I did realize that this needs to have a door in it, so before I attach anything, I'm going to cut out the door. I'm doing a typical door size, which is 3 feet wide by 7 feet tall, which in dollhouse is 3 inches wide by 7 inches tall. I'm going to be using a hot glue gun to initially attach these to the sides of the walls. And thank you for the few of you that suggested a precision glue gun. I am really enjoying this one. The glue takes hold pretty quickly, so I'm definitely making sure I'm lining it up as well as I can and that it is even on the top and bottom. Now that it's complete, I can add it onto my base. I'm first sanding the top of the foam board because it's shiny and that could resist some glue, and sanding it down is going to give it more of a tooth for it to grab onto. I'm using this Fabrifix glue and the hot glue all together. The Fabrifix is going to hold over time and the hot glue is going to help hold right away. So I'm putting the hot glue on last in just a couple spots so that as I lay down my wall, the hot glue takes hold and holds it in place, and the Fabrifix, which takes longer to dry, is held in place. Continuing around the corner, this is going to be the wall that's between the dining room and the sitting room area. I'm only adding a wood dowel to one side because it's going to butt up against the wood dowel that's on the other wall. This also is a very unique wall in the Beetlejuice house because it has these little half walls on the side, and then I will have to make some decorative pieces that go in between the half wall and the ceiling area. I'm adding on my one dowel, sanding the base, so again I have a good area for it to glue onto, and then adding my Fabrifix and the hot glue. You may have noticed I'm also using my 1, 2, 3 blocks to help hold up the walls as they're drying. The hot glue helps on the base, but it doesn't help keep them upright. I also added one more exterior wall off camera, and so now we have a 3-sided room. The first room of the Beetlejuice dollhouse is now standing. Well, at least it has 3 walls that are standing. And this is the area of the house where there's like a little pass-through, and it has some decorative posts right here. So I'm gonna have to make those later. Right now I'm just trying to make the solid areas that are the walls. And then this is the area where you would walk through to the kitchen. So I'm pretty happy with that, but now I get to do some experiments with magnet walls, because according to my plan here, this is going to be a removable magnet wall. So now I get to play with that and figure out how that's going to work. But yay for standing walls! That's so exciting! Before I do anything official in the house, I want to do a bit of an experiment with the magnets. These are the magnets I mentioned at the beginning of the video. They're very strong, and initially I was thinking that I would be using a magnet connecting with a magnet, but they're way too strong for that. So I'm going to be using pin nails, and these pin nails are the same ones I've used in my retro stove kit. If you've made that kit, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They come in these flat strips and they go into a nail gun. Well, I'm going to be using them as the flat strips, and so this is how they come, and all I do is take a pair of pliers or a pair of wire cutters and cut them apart, and then I get some flat rectangular sections of metal that the magnet can hold on to. So one side is going to have a magnet and one side is going to have a set of pin nails. I'm going to inset these into the top layer of foam. To do that, I'm being very careful and just cutting through the top layer of paper. I'm not cutting all the way through, and then I can pull it out and then cut out a little extra foam, or you can kind of push down on the foam if you'd like to, and you want just enough room so that that magnet fits in there and is flush with the surface of the foam board. I'm doing the same thing with the pin nails, but of course they are a different shape. Initially, I'm going to be gluing these in with a little bit of hot glue just so that it will stay in place during the test. I did have it rip out later on, so hot glue is not enough to make sure that these metal pieces stay in place. There's going to be a much bigger force with them wanting to be together than to stay inside the foam board. To correct for this, and also to practice what it would be like once there's wallpaper on the walls, I'm going to be covering the magnet. Well, first I'm going to drop it, and of course, to make a huge mess. I'm going to be covering the magnet and the pin nails with a thick cardstock paper. This is to just test and make sure that anything I put on the wall, hopefully they will still attract each other through those finishes. Also, the glue and the paper kind of act as a bandage that keeps the metal pieces inside the foam, because the hot glue is not going to do it by itself. So these work really well. I'm really happy with how much they're holding on, and I think this is going to work for the wall. So now, working on the wall itself, I'm taking one of my 9-inch wall pieces that I made before, and I'm marking out the distance that I need to cover that's going to go in this gap between the two wood poles. There's not going to be any wood poles on this piece. I'm just going to go ahead and cut that wall like I would any normal wall. The trick is I'm going to be cutting out a bit of one of the layers. As you can kind of see here, I've drawn out two 3/4 inch thick strips. These are what's going to be installed into the house itself that the wall is going to clamp onto. If it seems confusing now, it will all make sense soon, so bear with me. I'm going to mark out the same width on the wall, so 3/4 inch. I'm just using the previous ones that I marked out as a guide, and then I'm going to cut through one of the layers. Now remember, this is a double layer wall, so I'm just going to be cutting through the top layer of foam. The next step can be a bit difficult and annoying, and it sometimes depends on the type of foam board that you're using, but I'm going to rip off the top layer of foam, and what you're going to see left over, it doesn't look super nice, but it's the paper from the bottom layer of foam board that's glued on. What you'll see is that one of these 3/4 inch strips will fit in that gap. It will take a little bit to just kind of carve out that edge, but eventually I'm going to cover the whole thing in paper, and so it will look a lot better than it does now. Before I cut the 3/4 inch strips apart, I'm going to go ahead and mark out where I'm putting my magnets so that it correlates with where I'm putting my pin nails. They need to match up so that when I try to put my wall on the house, there's metal there that it can grab onto. I'm measuring 1 inch up from the bottom and 1 inch down from the top, and that's going to be the center point of where my magnet is going to be on my wall and where my pin nail is going to be on my 3/4 inch pieces. I'm not quite sure what to call them. I'll call them wings, the wall wings. I'm cutting them off now that I have them located. They are not covered with paper yet, but I did find again that they pulled out of the foam board. But as you can see, those little pieces fit in the gaps where we removed the other foam board really well, and this is exactly what I want. Before attaching it to the house, I am going to go ahead and put those pieces of paper because I don't want to have to mess with that or worry about the pin nails or the magnets pulling out of the wall once everything's glued in. For now, I'm just using some really thin printer paper because when I add the wallpaper, I don't want to add too much paper on top and then it being too thick for the magnet to grab hold to the metal through. I'm covering up both the magnets and the pin nails. So once those are done, they are ready to go into the house. Again, I'm using a combination of the Fabri-Tac and some hot glue, and I'm attaching those little wing pieces to the inside edge of the wood, leaving a gap for the outside edge foam board of the wall. Hopefully when I do the close-up, you will see how that works. The inside thinner piece of foam board fits in between the wings, and then voila, you have a wall. I wanted all of this to dry overnight, and I think every now and then it's good for me to kind of tell you when things are taking a long time to progress. A lot of times in my videos you don't realize how many days it's been, how many hours, how long dry times are, and so this project has been a lot of dry time. And it will continue to be a lot of dry time. So what I think I'm going to do is continue to do some of the walls off camera because it's going to be the same thing of the foam board with the wood, trying to get it to just all function and go around the perimeter of the bottom floor. I will show you a close-up of the magnet wall working. After I got everything glued down, I put it again under some books so that it could continue to dry through the night. If I have any inclination in my head that something may still be in the process of drying, I'm going to make sure that it is under something heavy so that it stays as flat as possible. Welcome to another Beetlejuice video on Bentley House Minis. Now I was going to make another I've done nothing joke, except something has happened since the last video. I didn't do it, but let me show you. So what you're seeing here is the base for the Beetlejuice project. It is lifted off of that table that I showed you in one of the first videos. It's a folding table. I had the legs cut a little bit shorter so that this base could be built. The bottom part of the base is the same size as the table, and then it kind of curves out to give me just a little bit more room for the house to sit on, and so I can create some of the lawn. But I wanted to go ahead and show it to you, and I will show you the floor plan sitting on the base so you can see it. So I'm gonna go get it. Hold on. This is currently the floor plan on the base. I probably will build up some of the hill so it may even sit a little bit higher. But I've got a lot more room than in my original drawing just because I did these curve up pieces in the design. So I'm very happy to have this. Beetlejuice has a home. It no longer has to sit on top of whatever flat surface I can find. There's an actual safe spot for it to exist. In this video, I am going to be finishing off the dining room, which includes this magnet wall that I created previously. This is actually supposed to be the sculpture display area where Delia puts her sculptures. So I need to pop this wall out like this to make enough room for the sculptures. I'm probably going to just make it look like this was maybe another bay window addition onto the house. And then this will be inserted into foam board so it looks like the window that goes onto the bay window. So thankfully this is the magnet wall, so I can just pull it out and I'm ready to go. I went ahead and cut out where the bay window is going to be, and then I can start building the room on the back, or the display area on the back, and I can then insert the block wall. Luckily, in one of my first building videos, I made a bunch of double thick foam board walls, and so I'm going to be using those and just cutting off pieces that I need to build out this bay window. This is the double thick foam board piece that you see me measuring and writing on at the moment. I am going to be making this bay window about 2.5 inches deep, and I'm hoping this will be enough room to put in the sculptures. I'm adding some Fabri-Tac glue or Fabri-Fix glue on the side of the wall, and then I'm adding some hot glue on the two ends. The Fabri-Fix glue is going to hold over time, and the hot glue is going to immediately take hold so that I don't have to hold it in place while it dries. This is going to be one of the side walls for the sculpture display. I added the second wall off camera, and now I'm putting in the bottom part of the display. This piece is going to be helpful in making sure the two side walls are sitting at 90-degree angles, because at the moment they're kind of like a little bit wonky, as you can see. Putting this piece in, I can glue it to it, and then I know it will be sitting correctly. The phrase "glue it to it" should be like the Nike phrase, but of like the crafters world. Just glue it to it. I finished up the top of the room. As you can see, the bottom of the room is, or the bottom of the bay window, whatever you want to call it, is lifted up a little bit, and that's because I do want the sculptures to sit up a little higher on the floor. This way they can be easily seen over the dining room table. I'm now taking some of that same double thick foam board, and I am cutting off a back area for this bay window. I'm not going to be gluing it on yet because I still have to cut a hole for our blue glass block wall. I'm putting the front part of the bay window on and tracing around the interior. This is going to let me know where the edges of my bump out are, and then I can use those to center my window on the wall where it's going to be seen through the bay window opening. I'm going to take a pencil and exactly trace around my window, so hopefully the plan is it will fit perfectly inside the opening. I'm popping it out, and then I can go ahead and give it a try with this window. Fingers crossed one thing goes right with the window. And as you can see, it is centered within the bay window, and so I think that'll probably look really good. I'm not going to glue the window into the wall yet because we have to do the finishes for the bay window itself. So just like I did in the past, I need to cover up the foam edges, and because I completely ruined my wood glue top, I'm just going to be basically sticking my finger into the bottle, getting some wood glue on my fingertip, and then running it along the foam board edges. This is going to dry and protect the foam board when I start using some spray paint. Any edge that I think the spray paint might touch, I need to make sure is covered so I don't have any foam board that melts. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to go outside someplace with a lot of ventilation and spray it with this gray paint. Here you can see it going into its final place. Well, not final because it's removable, but it worked really well. The magnets were able to hold it in place even with the addition of the heavy resin wall. It holds really well. I'm going to be referencing back to my original model that I created, and this time I'm going to be working on the kitchen area, which is in the opposite corner of the dining room. I started working on the back rooms first because it wasn't as intimidating as the front rooms, which will create the facade of the house, which is the most iconic part of the house. The back isn't seen as much, and so I'm not as intimidated by it, I guess. If you want to see how I create the walls and the process of attaching the square dowels onto the walls, I will put my original video down in the description box below. It will also go into more depth on the magnet walls, which I'm using the exact same process for the magnet wall in the kitchen that I used in the dining room. Here I'm attaching my first wall, and I'm showing you that I put a pencil mark that's going vertically up the wall. Because it's not going directly against a corner, this pencil mark is going to help me make sure that I'm getting it as close to a 90-degree angle as possible. I did want to show you this center area, which is going to be the next wall I put up. Before working on the walls though, I need to cut out a hole here. This is going to be the main way that my wiring for the lights is going to go from the base or underneath the base of this project up through the walls and be able to reach the second and third floor. This is going to be key because I really don't want to use battery lights in this project. I really want to basically just have a switch where I can turn the lights on and off. Once the hole was cut, I could continue constructing my walls using the same wood dowel and double thick foam board wall construction. I will have to put a doorway in this wall that I'm making right now, but before I can do that, I needed to pull out a set of stairs so I could measure where the doorway needed to go. These were sent in by Stephanie, specifically to be used for this project. I laid the stairs down in place so I had a pretty good idea of their width, and then I could start laying out where I wanted the door. I decided to make this an arched doorway, and then I just used a pencil to trace it out and make sure it seemed to fit within my plan. And then I also made sure I had room for trim on either side, so when I decided to finish the wall, I didn't run out of room. After cutting the door, I made sure to put it back in place and double check that everything looked right. This wall is going to go around that hole I previously cut in the floor. It's an L shape, and I ended up moving the wood dowel not to the corner but just a little bit inside because it would have made a very awkward thin piece of foam board. Doesn't really matter where the dowel is as long as it's helping hold up the upper floor. I pre-constructed this piece so I could make sure that it dried completely and it was easy to install once it was dry. I made sure to line it up with the facade of the dining room, and this will continue. This is where that bar is that Otho is standing at in one of the scenes. Here you can see that the hole goes through the bottom of the base and all the way up through the top of the wall. And because this is basically a quadruple thick wall, this process is going to continue to strengthen this house, and that's really important because I'm making it out of foam board and I want to make sure it will last. Next, I want to continue the exterior walls of the kitchen. These are just going to be going around the border of the base. This is going to be the door that the Maitlands come out of at the very beginning of the movie, and so I had to make sure and put that door in there. This piece that I'm putting in now has the magnets included in it and is the other side of the magnet wall. I created this magnet wall that is just like the one in the dining room. It has 4 magnets, one on each corner, that coincide with pin nails that are already inserted in the attached walls. This wall you see on the bottom here ended up just being one big long wall of foam board that also has a gap in it, so in future I plan to add a column to help support this area. After I'd finished up the walls for the kitchen, I wanted to go ahead and do a little bit with the stairs. The stairs are one of the most iconic parts of the house, honestly, because Lydia dances in the air in front of the stairs. And I just wanted to go ahead and get a jump start on that area of the house, so this is what I did. When it came to the stairs, I really wanted to work on a flat surface. So what I did was I held them upright and took a scrap piece of foam board and kind of marked where that foam board hit the bottom of the stairs. So when I transported it onto my work table, I could kind of line everything up with the grid and make sure that I had the stairs at the correct angle so it didn't look like they were leaning the wrong way once I had finished my build that's going underneath the stairs. Once I was happy with how they were sitting, I put a piece of paper underneath and started to trace the outline of the stairs. As I stated before, this is a really important part of the house, and so it's really important that I get this area correct. In the example I showed you, there's this little underneath area. It looks like maybe a reading nook or something underneath the stairs, so that's what I'm going to be creating today. I drew a triangle that will exist underneath the stairs, and I just kind of drafted out the area that I want to be open. This is creating my pattern that I can then put onto my foam board and start cutting out those pieces. I'm cutting off the stairs because I don't need to account for those. They were really just there for me to draw underneath them. So here's the opening, and we're looking from the exterior of the house in towards the stairs, so that's why it kind of looks like it's backwards from the picture I showed you, but if you're looking from inside the house, it's the correct way. Off camera, I went ahead and cut out the opening on the solid piece, and that's what I have right now in my hands. And I left this little stiletto heel looking piece on the corner, and that's because this piece isn't going to be glued in, and it's going to act as a balance to keep the stairs upright. Later on, it can be cut off. Once I'm happy with my pieces, I'm going to go ahead and measure in between the foam board so that I can create a wall that will go in between those pieces and make a ceiling and interior wall for the stair opening. This ended up being like 2¼ inches. I just cut a long length of that size off of some scrap foam board, and it was very fiddly without anything being glued down, but made sure that would fit in between the two foam board walls. Before I could add in the 2¼ inch wide piece, I decided to go ahead and glue down the double thick walls so that they weren't moving all over the place. I glued one to each side of the stairs, making sure that the stiletto heel piece was going to be against the exterior wall. Then I glued on the other piece, and here's what I'm left with. Now I can take this single layer of foam board and measure what size it needs to be to go here and create this wall. I'm adding a pencil mark where I would be cutting it off, but instead of cutting it, I decided to go ahead and score it. And so that means I'm just going to be cutting with my X-Acto knife through one side of the paper that's on the foam board. Then I can fold it and kind of crack the foam board in half, and then that is going to create a very nice joint that's going to go from the wall part to the ceiling part underneath the stairs. This is kind of saving me a step in having to make sure that the two pieces that I could cut individually come together nicely. Once those fit well, I can go ahead and glue them in place, and I'm going to be using tacky glue for that. Every now and then you'll see me use my hot glue gun just to tack things in place so that I don't have to hold them while they dry. I didn't have a long enough piece to score it again, so this piece I'm cutting from a separate piece of foam board, and I'm just going to be angling one of the corners so that when I do put it in place, it fits snugly up against the previous piece that I put in, and I have a nice angle there underneath the stairs. Then I can cut it off to size and glue that piece in place as well, and now we have our book nook underneath the stairs. I'm not really messing with this top portion yet because that's going to involve the second floor, and so I'm just leaving that alone for now. So now I can put that into my project. You can see how it sits up against the wall. It does really look like a high heel shoe, which I think is kind of funny, but this is how it fits in. As you can see, I'm leaving room for that wood dowel on the right side because I do have to have an exterior wall that will go past that and enclose the staircase. From this angle, you can see that the stairs do stick up pretty high past the top of the walls, and I do have to remember that I will be putting in a ceiling and a floor for the second floor, and I'm not quite sure how tall that's going to be, and so I might have to cut off some of the top of the stairs, but that's a future ARIS problem. And eventually I will cut off that heel, which is what I was showing you in that clip. So here is a final look at what I got built during this video. I'm pretty happy with the process. We now have a new room to work on, the kitchen. There's going to be a lot that goes on in that room because it's supposed to be a modern kitchen. I don't think I've ever done a kitchen before. Definitely not a modern one, so it will be an adventure. Update, I have lost my Beetlejuice binder. Because I decided to clean my room. It's supposed to be on the floor over there, and now it's not because everything's cleaned up, but I don't know where I put it. Go me! Luckily, I had previously scanned my drawings so that I could share them with you. So I just printed them out so I could continue on, and I'll look for the binder later. This front wall is what I want to start building. However, I went ahead and printed all 3 floors because I have to reference everything when I'm building onto the house. I started by deciding where the magnet wall was going to be. I want the view to the staircase to be clear, so that's why I'm making the magnet wall opposite the staircase. This is also going to contain the fireplace. This is the tower wall, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with that yet, and I did find my binder, of course, right after I had printed these pages, but that's okay. Now I have a few copies to scribble notes all over. It was a little bit difficult to get started. I was trying to figure out where I wanted to start building. I ended up deciding on the front wall of the bay window because I knew this was going to be the most complicated build. This is going to be a wall that needs to have a window within it. To begin, I'm using my typical method of the dowels and the foam board put together. I'm cutting my dowels to make sure they are the exact same height as all the other dowels in the project. This is going to help make my ceiling and my second level sit correctly on top of the first level once it's built. I'm now going to be cutting out the length that I need to go between the two wood dowels to create my front wall of the bay window. Whenever I'm creating these walls, I just need to make sure to take into account the thickness of the wood dowels, because that's going to add a length onto each end of my wall. So basically, I'm just cutting out the wall that's going to go on the inside of the dowels. This front bay window has 3 windows within it, so I want to try and be as accurate as I can, but of course allowing myself to make changes for what fits in the dollhouse. I'm marking an X on the area that I need to cut out to make room for the window. However, I'm not going to cut it out yet because I want to glue everything together. Otherwise, these areas would be a very thin place to put glue, and it would be very difficult to make sure everything sticks together and stays at a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to be using tacky glue and some hot glue. It's going to hold on to that dowel so I don't have to worry about it taking a long time to take hold, but then my tacky glue will hold over time, and if my hot glue lets go, it's not that big of a deal. Once both dowels are glued onto the wall, I'm going to let them dry completely before I cut out the window area in the center. I'm also going to use some cardstock to reinforce the wall below and above the window area so that when I do remove that big square that's going to be where the window exists, I don't have to worry about my wall falling apart. I know that everything is completely glued together and very sturdy. I end up doing this a lot in this project during this video, and I call them, they're kind of like little patches or little paper mache patches with paper and glue, and they really do reinforce all of these pieces really well. And now I can do what I've been waiting for this entire time, which is cut a hole in this wall and insert the window. This is really going to be where this project starts to take a little bit of life, I feel like. It's been a long journey just to this point. It was a little bit snug trying to get the window into the spot, so I decided to see if I could sand down the foam board just a little bit. I felt like that was a little bit safer than trying to cut a straight line with an X-Acto blade, because if I messed it up, I wouldn't have as nice of a finish on the wall. Once I was happy with the fit, I added glue on the inside of the opening and I was ready to glue the window in place. This is going to strengthen this wall back up again because I'm filling the hole that I took out of it, except it's with a whole nother piece. It's with the window. Now that I've gone through the very long and tedious process that was that front wall, I'm going to kind of speed through the other 2 walls that make up the bay window. I'm going to be cutting these out of foam board and not worrying about the dowels because they're going to be glued up against the dowels that are in the main window. These are at an angle, so I'm going to have to figure that out because I can't quite line them up like I would a 90-degree angle. I'm cutting out the area where I'm going to put in one of these single windows. The single window went together just like the bay window did, except of course it's smaller. And then it just slides into place, which is going to make this wall stronger again. It's just going to be replacing the foam board that I cut out, so now it's one complete wall structure. I'm doing both of these walls on either side of the bay window the very same way, except that they're mirrored so that they look correct. So now I'm going to be gluing all of this in. I didn't want to glue the front wall in until I had the 2 side walls because that way they can kind of support each other once the glue starts going on. I'm using my 1, 2, 3 blocks to help me support the wall in place until I can get the side walls so that it has something to glue up against. I'm using tacky glue to glue everything together and giving it plenty of time to dry before I touch it again. As I add walls, I'm using masking tape to hold the walls together and make sure that they are in place and stay where I want them to stay. Because of the angle of the sidewall, there is a gap that is left between the 2 pieces, which I will address in the future. Now I'm going to be adding on one more wall that has some pin nails inserted within it. I added another wall with a dowel. Well, I'm trying to. Right now I'm looking for it. I can't find it. And then I realized I had set it on the base, waiting to put it in place. I'm going to be adding this to the other side of the bay window with a dowel because that is a corner that's going to be meeting up with the next wall. Speaking of the next wall, I'm going to be adding this one in with a space for a window because I really don't feel like making another window for quite a while. And this is how it's looking so far. I have quite a few walls added in. It started out really slow, but then things started to gain momentum and I added one more before going to bed. It's the other half of the magnet wall and it contains the pin nails. I'm putting my hand behind this wall, so hopefully you can see that you can see through it. That means that these pieces are not very tight to each other. They're not sitting flat against each other. And as I started pushing on the walls, they were just very wobbly and I didn't feel like they were secure enough. So I'm going to start using this new technique of a paper bracket and some glue to make these a little bit tighter to each other. I'm going to be using this on the back of the wall first, and this is going to go up in the corner. I'm cutting the two sides of the bracket so that I know I won't be covering up any of the windows. I'm making sure that it fits first, and I'm leaving a little extra, a little taller than the wall so I have something to hold on to, and then I'm just adding plenty of glue, not so much that I'll have a gluey mess, but enough that I know that there will be glue on every part of this piece of paper. It takes a little bit of practice to get it in place. The big part of it is making sure that I get the folded piece right in the corner, and if I can do that, then it goes on pretty straight. And then I just need to press all along the paper, which will adhere it to the wall and spread out all the glue evenly underneath the paper. I am using just plain computer paper at this moment because I want it to stay relatively flat, so when I add the wallpaper on top, you don't see any bumps. The strength in this is not necessarily the paper, although I do feel like it gets pretty strong. It's the glue that I'm adding with the paper, so it becomes this like glue patch that holds everything together. I'm now going to be using some drywall compound in these gaps that are between my walls. Now that I have the paper on the back of the wall, I don't have to worry about this drywall compound kind of oozing through the back of the wall. It has a place to stop it, and I can fill these in. By filling in these spaces, I'm going to have a better chance of this wall staying structurally sound over the course of its lifetime. I'm making sure to get it as smooth as possible, and while that's drying, I decided to go ahead and do this paper technique over the edges of the window. There were a few gaps in the window where you could see through the wall again. You could call this like a dollhouse band-aid or something. It covers up all the gaps and makes sure that the parts are staying together so that no dollhouse blood comes out. I don't know. Well, that analogy fell apart, but the technique does work really well. Now that the drywall compound is dry, I can go ahead and add these pieces over those areas. This is going to connect those two walls together, and the drywall is giving me a place where I can glue this and make it one solid surface. And so now you will never even know that there was a gap between any of these walls. Now that the bay window is structurally sound, I can move on to the magnet wall, which is going to contain the fireplace. I went ahead and made it because I made it just like the other magnet walls that I've done in my previous video. These have a magnet in the side, and for some reason, it's always just so satisfying to hear that click in place. I also pre-built this little foam board box. It's just a really simple construction, but this is going to be the structure that is the outside of my fireplace or the chimney that runs up the side of the house. It is important for me to know where this goes in correlation with the base because I do need to make a hole in the wall from the inside of the house going into the chimney area. So I'm going to grab this wall and go work on it at my work table to try and figure out how this goes together. I drew a pencil outline so I knew for sure without having this connected where it needed to go. I'm not gluing it on yet because I want this to sit flat on my surface while I work on the opening. The magnet wall that's laying on my work surface is the piece that's actually going to become the brick wall. And then I'm going to have the void or the black space be the chimney that's beyond it, and then I'm going to build something in front of it to be what holds the mantle. So I'm starting with the brick area because this is going to be my wall that has the hole that's cut into it. So now I can go ahead and glue the chimney backing onto this piece because that's the most complicated cut I'm going to have to do to the magnet wall. But then I realized it's going to be easier to paint this chimney area black first before I glue it on, and then I don't have to fight with all those little brick pieces trying to get my paintbrush in there. So I painted that, and then I'm just going to add glue to all the edges, making sure that I line everything up with my pencil lines. This is how I will know it will line up with my base once I add it back to my dollhouse. Now I was going to move on to making my mantle, which is the exciting part. I went ahead and made a box of foam board again, and then I cut out the very specific shape that's going to be the inside of the mantelpiece. This is going to sit on top of the magnet wall and reveal the bricks within. As I said before, I'm not going to be finishing this piece during this video, but I am loving how it's looking. I have put these together temporarily with masking tape, a few dots of hot glue, so I can get it apart at a later date when I am able to put the finishes onto it. But here you can see the three levels. We have the mantle, the brick wall, and the black void or the chimney that's on the back of the wall. So now let's go put this in place, and this will be my final build for the Beetlejuice video today. Again, it is always so satisfying to have that wall click in place. This first floor has been sitting flat on the base for quite a while now. Now it's time to build something underneath it. And the requirement at the beginning of any project I do recently is to realize you don't have enough of what you need to even really get started. I need quite a bit of this pink foam board, and this is all I have. So I have to leave the studio, which I hate to do, and go out in public to get some more supplies. And it looks like we're going to be building quite an expensive hill underneath this house. Tried to use my awesome karate skills to get it into the car. That didn't work so well, so I just did it the normal boring way, put it back into the car, and headed home to actually get started on this project. My plan is to start with the foundation pieces directly underneath the first floor, and then slowly I can build up until I have a hill that fills the entire square space that is the top of this base piece. So I'm just tracing underneath the first floor, and I'm going to carefully cut that out with my box cutter. I'm using a ruler to try and get as straight lines as I can. Thankfully, this stuff is pretty easy to snap in half once you get a deep line cut into it. After I get it cut into a much smaller piece, I can go ahead and try to get all of the details of the shape of the first floor cut. With this piece done, I can start to imagine how this is going to look in the end. And I also need to figure out the direction of the house. There is a rather large piece or a porch that comes off of the front of it that Delia has built, and I want to incorporate that as well. So I'm keeping that in mind as I make my decisions. I also want to cut out the interior of this base. I want the foundation to be hollow because there's going to be quite a few things that go into this base, such as electronics, wiring for lights, and then I do come up with an idea for the garage, which I will be building in a future video. This is how it's looking. I'm making sure that it's wide enough so that it does sit on top of this hole, which allows the wires to come up through the base, which is where all of the wiring is going to be hooked together. Cutting this shape out over and over again as one big piece is not going to work. It's going to eat through my foam board pretty quickly, so I'm cutting them out of smaller pieces that I have cut out, and I'm just going to have to piece each one together. While I was in the middle of this project, I did get an order that I had put in. I got a really good deal on this foam wire cutter. I have never tried one of these before, and I thought this would be the perfect project to try it out on. Before I get started on that, I'm going to glue the pieces that I have. I'm gluing as I go because this is just going to become one really complicated puzzle if I don't stay on top of where each piece is supposed to end up. I've got the wire cutter plugged in, I've got a mask, I've got the filter running, and it's time to test out this wire cutter. It did work pretty well cutting through the foam. It would definitely save on a lot of hand pain. However, it made a ton of smoke and it really just made this kind of gooey look to the edge of the foam, and it was really stringy and honestly just kind of gross. So I decided it probably wasn't going to be the best way to go forward because I had many more pieces and many more layers to cut, which means it was going to be a lot of smoke and fumes. So I've decided I'm going to use the wire cutter pretty sparingly and continue to cut by hand on these pieces, so it's going to take me a while. The key here was just to continue to trace with a pencil and make sure I cut and glued as I went along. Each one of these foam board pieces is 1 inch thick, so this is a 3-inch thick foundation that I've already cut. Here you can see me testing the first floor on top of it to make sure it looks right. Now I also want to add some more supports along the front. They have these like support pillars in the movie. And I also need to create the hill. This is going to be sitting up a little bit higher because a 3-foot tall garage is not going to work. It's still only going to be about 6 feet tall, so it's going to be smaller than probably what it should be, but taller than 3 feet. The part I'm working on now is going to be the very top layer of the hill. So I'm making the edges just slightly outside the boundary of my foundation, and I'm also continuing to cut out the interior because I need the cavity inside of the base to continue to go all the way to the top of the wooden part that contains the underworld. The second layer of the hill is going to be slightly bigger, and it's just going to continue to spread out until I've filled up the entire area that's available to me. At this point, I decided to do a little bit more sculpting on the layers of the hill. I wanted there to be a bit more of the second layer coming out so that it was easier to build the columns that go underneath the porch. So I added in some foam, and later on I can fix the holes. It doesn't have to be perfect because it's all going to be covered. Off camera, I made some stacks of foam. I want it to be smaller towards the top and get larger towards the bottom. And then I cut them each carefully so that it fit against the layer of the hill, and everything, hopefully, fingers crossed, will work together once it's all covered. Speaking of that, I'm going to be doing my first layer of aluminum foil. This is going to help me cover up any imperfections, such as these holes wherever I extended the foam, and it's also going to make a more gentle slope going from each layer to the next layer down. This is how it looks all around the edge. This took one entire box of 75-foot roll of aluminum foil, but I'd like to get the cheap kind because it is much easier on your hands and you don't get as many cuts working with it. This is how it looks once the green is on there. It's pretty bright, and I do have this feeling of making some kind of junior high fort project, or one of those projects where you have to make a landmass or something. It was so exciting to finally see the house sit up on its perch. It was one of those things where you're like, I've done all this work and now I get to enjoy it. I get to sit back and look at it. And I was so happy. I'm happy with the pillars in the front lawn. I'm happy with the black and white stripes. Even though they're a little bit dirty, I think they still read as they're supposed to. And I really didn't want them to take away too much from the house. But I really like the proportions as well. I think 3 inches for the foundation built up on a slight hill is just going to be perfect and not add too much height. Before I can finish this wall, I have to make a really scary decision. When I was drawing out the kitchen, I noticed that the burners for the stove are inset into the wall. And the only place I can really do this is into this wall right here, which makes sense because I have this little build out right here. So it wouldn't look too weird if there was more wall on this side of the house. However, I already built the foundation, so that's frustrating. But also this is the wall that has the magnets. So I have a very limited space in where I can put the inset stove. So I don't know what to do. This is almost the only place the fridge can go because it is massive. I could put it over here, but I don't know, it just makes the most sense because this wall is bumped out over here for the dining room. So I'm gonna go for it. I'm really nervous about this. I don't like cutting into already set walls, but we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna go for it. My triangle came in handy again in this situation. I could set it against the desktop and make sure that I got a perpendicular line, and then I measured out, making sure that I checked on the inside and the outside, I measured out where this little stove opening was going to be. Now this is a very awkward stovetop. It's incredibly small even in the movie. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I can't see how Delia can actually see what she is cooking on this stovetop. It's very strange. I did find the standing desk feature of the FlexiSpot desk really helpful in this situation because I could raise it up higher so that the cutting angle with my wrist was so much easier. Now I can get back to tackling that hole I cut for the stovetop. I cut out some strips of foam board, and this is going to create this extra wall that's on the outside. I'm just going to be extending the wall over. However, I did decide that I'm going to slant the very bottom of the wall, so I don't have to worry about not having enough foundation at the bottom. I framed out the top and bottom of where the stove is going to be, and I added these pieces to the other side and cut holes in them in case I need to thread a wire through that side wall to add lights into the fridge. Before I add the back wall or the new exterior wall on, I'm going to pre-paint the interior and also pre-paint this little rectangle here, which is going to make sure that the interior of my stove alcove, I guess I should say, is going to be completely painted before I glue that on. Speaking of that, it's now time to do that permanently. One of the best ways I've found to add foam board to foam board is to use Fabrifix glue and then leave a few spots where I can add some hot glue, because the hot glue takes hold immediately and the Fabrifix holds over time. So this helps me place things really quickly and know that they're not going to slide down or go out of place. I still added some masking tape to double make sure that everything was going to have time to dry. My hope is to completely finish the first floor of the house and create the base for the second floor of the house so that I can start working on that in a few months. If you're new to my channel, this isn't the house. Let me show you the house. That's just the model. This is the house. If you've been watching this project since the beginning, you will recognize what I am doing here. I need to glue 2 sheets of foam board together. This is what I have made almost the entire project out of, is double thick foam board walls. The other thing I'm going to have to make with foam board is the ceiling for the first floor. Now this may seem kind of out of order because I don't even have the walls yet, but believe me, I need to make this part first before I finish these final walls, because this area of the house is open to the second floor. Which is honestly why I've probably put it off so long. I did not quite know how to do this part. And let me tell you, this model has been so valuable to me because I have been able to look at it over and over again to figure out where I am in the building process. So if you are thinking about building something of this size from scratch, I definitely suggest building a smaller scrap model first so that you can think out all your ideas. So when you get to the more expensive, bigger materials, you don't waste as much. While I was straightening up some of my traced lines, I realized from this model that I needed to square up the floor for the second floor. because the bay window is only on the first floor, and if I did not have this model to show me that, I would have totally missed it and had to fix those corners. So once I had figured everything out, I was able to start cutting out my very first ceiling for this project. This is going to take quite a few pieces of foam board because I need 2 pieces for the ceiling and then 2 pieces that are going to be the floor for the second floor. And the reason for this is I want it to be extra strong since I am building 2 more floors on top of this. So this is just the first layer of what's going to be several layers. Once I knew that I had cut out this piece correctly, I could start making room for the stairs. The stairs are going to have to go up past the ceiling in order to connect with the second floor. So I'm just tracing out the areas that need to be open. This opening has a curve to it, so I'm using a drafting tool called a flexible curve, and I did find a link for you if you're interested in something like this. I will put it down in the description box below. It's a flexible piece of plastic that allows you to create a curve that you want and then trace it out onto your project. And I did find for this, it worked really well. I didn't have to go find something that was the shape I wanted in order for me to trace it. All this foam board that you see below the curve will now be cut out. This will make room for the stairs, and it will also be the area where you can look from the second floor down to the first floor. I'm leaving in some real-time footage of me cutting this curve because I do often get questions about how I get my cuts so clean. So for this, I am first doing a very shallow pass with the knife. This gives my knife kind of a guide on where it needs to go, and then I'm getting deeper and deeper into the foam board cut, going very slowly. Then I can turn the foam board and do the same thing in the other direction. So the key to this is not to try and cut it all the way through on the first pass. Go very slow and give your knife some direction on the curve you actually want. This piece can now be added back to the first floor, and you can really start to see how this is going to be open to this lower area that is the foyer or the entrance to the house. And this is how the stairs are going to fit in with everything. As I said, there's going to be a few more layers on top of here, so that's why it doesn't match up perfectly. I want this to be incredibly sturdy, even though I'm just using foam board for most of the construction. So now that it's done, it's kind of reminding me of some kind of MC Escher drawing at the moment, but I am going to double up this foam board as I previously stated. I'm going to do this by gluing just some big generic chunk pieces onto the other side, allow that to dry, and then later, once it is dry and completely flat, I will cut out the excess pieces so I have a double thick layer. The foam board pieces had now been underneath some heavy books for about 48 hours, and I felt confident enough to remove them and start using them. And of course, Stormy was very helpful in this process. She double-checked everything for me. Please excuse any mess and my outfit. We're very much still in summer mode around here. We have all sorts of fun family projects going on all over the place. So now I can move the wall foam board and the ceiling foam board back to my studio. I'm just going to remove any of the excess foam board around the ceiling that I previously cut. This is a tedious process. However, I am so much happier with a double thick ceiling. I don't have to worry about it bending in any areas. It's going to be very strong to support the next floor up. I'm taping it in place and getting the stairs where they need to go, so I can start cutting the walls that are going to go around this open area. All of the walls that don't have a ceiling directly on top of it need to be as tall as the foam board I just laid down for the ceiling. So I'm going to be extending this wall that I had previously glued down with just a strip of double foam board, and by gluing that on top, I fixed that problem. Previously, I did not know how I was going to make this space, so I'm glad it was an easy fix. Now I can cut the remaining foam board to be that same height and start building my walls. I'm using the same process I did in the very beginning of this project by adding a square piece of wood to the ends. This is going to give a little bit more strength to my foam board walls, and in the end it will help me by allowing me to clamp things in a few areas, and I know I'm not crushing the foam board. I'm not showing it in the video, but I do keep referencing my chipboard model that I made earlier on to know where the windows need to be and what walls need to be added where. You can also see that I have outlined where the walls need to be with a red pencil on the floorboards just to make sure that I have them correct before I start building. I realized where the stairs were going to be, I'm going to have this little alcove that I do think would be a good area for me to run some wiring if needed. So I need to cut that out before I build the walls, otherwise it's going to be almost impossible to cut later on if I do decide I need to use it. As the walls were going up, it was surprising to me how much smaller this foyer area started to feel. For the longest time, there were no walls here, and now all of a sudden it's completely enclosed. So now I'm putting up the front area that will have the entrance door. Now I can take the frame and I'm going to trace it out on my foam board. This is going to make installing it later after I paint it so much easier. I can just cut out the opening, and when I go to glue it in place, I want to have the door frame in the wall so I'm not at any point squishing it to where it's too small for the door frame to be inserted later on. This same process will work if you are purchasing your doors and building your walls from scratch. You can pre-put the door frames in place before you glue your walls, just so that you know everything's still going to fit once it's glued in place. This was another area that I felt it was important to clamp these pieces together, and having the wood pieces really helped with that. So that is the final wall that I need to install for the first floor. That's kind of a fun thing to be able to say. As you can see, the top of the walls are even with the top of the foam board ceiling I just recently cut, and that is going to help me stack the second floor on when I get to that. So that's going to be all for the first week of Beetle Gust. I know it was a lot of boring steps, but there were a lot of things that needed to get done so I could get to the fun stuff that's coming up. I think my voice is echoing into the project. Echo, echo, echo. I have some foam board problems I need to fix. This is the first project I have completely built from foam board, where I'm trying to make a house, like a full several story house. So I am definitely learning as I go, and I'm definitely learning that warp is a real pain in the butt. I try my best to keep warp as minimal as possible. I put everything I glue together under really heavy books, but sometimes it just happens, and it happens over weeks still after you think things are dry. So I'm gonna focus on that first, see if I can fix what's going on. Then I'm gonna focus on this piece right here, which is going to function as the ceiling for the first floor and the base on which I'm going to start building the second floor. So this is gonna be kind of a maintenance video, but it's one of those things that is very necessary when building a dollhouse. It just happens. You gotta... I'm putting the camera pretty low here, so hopefully you can see what the problem is. There's about a ½ inch that is between this base column and the floor of this dollhouse. And one of the reasons is that part of the house is full of furniture and finishes, and so it's a lot heavier than this part that is just open, which is going to be the porch. So what I want to try to do is put some moisture on this part of the foam board and like underneath and around, because I like to keep the paper on my foam board, which is what causes the problem. Paper is always the problem. So I'm going to try and add some moisture to this foam board, put some 1, 2, 3 blocks, let it sit for a bit, and see if I can get it to come back down to minimize this space. So I'll measure it before I do that, and hopefully we can get something to work here. And I've also had this foam board come up at the edge, even though I had this clamped for like a full week. It still ended up coming up. So instead of trying to fix this, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm just going to put some clay underneath here to make it look like I meant for this to come up. It's doing it in all 4 corners, so it'll just kind of end up looking like an artistic choice, even though it was not my choice. It was the foam board's choice. Before starting this process, I decided to lay down a trash bag because I will be using moisture and water, and I just want to make sure it doesn't get in places that I don't want it to be. I used a small spritzer to go around the top of the foam board. And I also spritzed underneath, trying to get as much of the surface of this part of the foam board damp as possible. I didn't want any puddling water, so I used paper towel to get off any big spots. And then I'll use my 1, 2, 3 blocks to weight down the edges. While I'm waiting to see if this will work or not, I can work on another warp. As you can see, this piece I made for the first floor ceiling does not lay flat on top of my walls. However, I do have a different plan in mind to fix this warp. What I'm going to do is divide up this ceiling into 3 different pieces. Part of the reason it's not sitting flat is because it's one large piece dealing with one large warp. So if I can cut it into 3 different pieces, there's not as much tension in the large piece and it will lay a bit more flat. So first I'm taking a pencil and marking around all the upper edges of the walls. This is going to let me know where each room is and where my walls are on the underside of this piece. I taped it down first to make sure nothing would move during this process, and I know exactly where I need to cut. The pencil lines are just barely visible here, but it's going to help me know where I can cut these pieces apart so that they still will sit on top of my walls. The walls are what's holding these up, so I need to make sure at least a small bit of it is touching the bottom of my ceiling. I added these V marks so that once I cut it apart, I know exactly how it goes back together. I am going very slow with my craft knife, trying to make sure I'm cutting at a perpendicular angle to my desk, just to make sure there's no weird angles when I try to take the ceiling pieces apart. I know it's only 3 pieces, but the red registration marks that I put in really help me make sure that I'm not second guessing myself when I'm working on my tabletop and away from the project. Now I can test everything on the project itself, and I have my fingers crossed that I made all the cut marks in the right locations. Thankfully I did, and every single ceiling piece does rest on top of a wall. There is still a little bit of a warp that I'm dealing with, but at least it's on a smaller scale and not going across my entire project. Here you can see that it's just a small ledge that it's sitting on, but it's enough of a ledge to hold up my ceiling, so I'm happy with it. Checking back in on my porch warp, nothing has really changed at all. The measurement between the bottom of the porch and the top of the columns is still the same, so I'm moving on to plan B, which is going to be cutting grooves in the bottom of the foam board, allowing it a little bit more room to move. And I totally forgot Adam was under here. I probably should have removed him before I was spritzing all of that water around my project. I made sure all of the furniture was out first before doing this, and then I flipped it over so I could access the bottom of this foam board piece. You can see even more how warped it is around this area. The walls really help avoid the warp, so I think that's why it's so warped in this area, because there's just no walls on the edge. So I'm cutting a V-shaped groove into the bottom. You can see me pulling out just a little bit of the foam board. I'm only cutting through 1 layer of foam board because I still want this to be strong. I just want to give it a little bit more permission to be able to move. So here you can see it does have a little bit more of an allowance. So I'm going to try the process all over again. Before I spritz anything, I am going to put a few cuts into the porch. I didn't realize I was doing this off camera, so here is a reenactment. I just put a few cuts into the very surface of the paper. I'm not cutting as deep, and I'm not cutting V shapes, I'm just putting slits. And hopefully this will keep the top layer strong, but still allow it to bend a little bit more. Here you can see a better look at the V shapes from the side. I spritzed everything and I'm putting weights on it, so hopefully it will bend down and close some more of that gap. In a live stream I did last year, I talked about this lighting plan. The entire live stream was my thought process of how I planned all of this out. I will link it down below if you're interested, but now I need to prepare the ceiling for these wires that will eventually be installed into this area. And now we can go back to checking on this porch. As you can see, there's still quite a bit of space between the porch and the columns. However, I do feel like it is way less curved. So what I'm going to do is build up the porch columns to the porch so that it is supported, but I'm just gonna go with the warp as it is. And it wins. It has defeated me. But we're going to be a little bit more careful with the warp going forward, and I have some new ideas to try out. Back to those ceiling segments, it's time to attach them to my rooms. Many of the removable walls are attached by magnets, and so that's what I want to do with these ceiling pieces as well, so I can always access the inside of the rooms whenever I want to. The first thing I'm going to do is figure out where I want the magnets to be, and I have taped the ceiling down once again just to make sure that it doesn't move, because I want to put a blue line that marks on the ceiling segment and then also on the wall. This is going to allow me to line up my magnet and pin nail so that once the ceiling is placed on top, it's perfectly aligned. This is a set of 5 pin nails that I have cut off of the pin nail segment, and I cut into the top of my wall, just into the foam board. I added some glue, set the pin nails in there, and covered them with a piece of paper. This is going to keep them from popping out. I also did the same on the other side with the magnet. In this shot, you can see both of the pieces of paper that are covering the pin nails and the magnet sitting on top of each other. And now when the ceiling segment is sat on top of the walls, they pop into place perfectly. So once I had the living room done, it was time to work on the other rooms. This took a while, I won't lie. It looks kind of quick on camera, but it was a lot of cutting into the top of the walls, and some of them I had covered with wood glue, so they were tough walls to cut into. Once I was done, I had 3 ceiling segments that connected to the walls. However, I wanted to make sure they could still connect to each other. So I'm using a Sharpie to create an hourglass shape in the connecting areas of these pieces. I'm using a craft knife to cut out just the top layer of foam board, and this is going to reveal a little shape. Once I have both pieces cut out, I'm just adding a piece of paper, and I'm using a crayon which I can rub flat over the top, which will give me the shape of the key. Once I have that done, I can cut it out of paper. This gives me a pattern, and then I will cut it out of mat board because mat board will be a lot stronger than paper. I added color codes and a little symbol so I know which way each key goes, and now I have a little piece that will connect my 2 ceiling segments together, and they won't be moving away from each other if there's any kind of movement around the dollhouse. I have 3 keys total with completely different colors, so I don't have to do a puzzle every time I want to put my ceiling together or take a piece out. And as you can see, it isn't going anywhere. It's magnetized and keyed down. Yes, I know. You're part of the show. Now that I have all the ceiling pieces figured out, and I know I can put them together again so that I know the correct shape, I can start working on the second floor. Yes, you're so helpful. So one of the things I noticed with my foam board, this is foam board I have not used, it is already warped. There is a curve to it. So I am going to do something a little bit different now that I'm starting the second floor. I've learned a lot from building the entire first floor. So now I can do things a little bit different and hopefully avoid some of the warp that I am still fighting on the first floor, or have lost the fight to on the first floor. So let's try it out. I see you. No. Because this foam board already had a warp and it'll probably just warp more in the future, I am starting this process by scoring both sides of the foam board. I put 3 scores in the top part of the foam board, and then in different locations I'm putting a couple more scores on the bottom. I want them to be in different locations so I don't accidentally cut through. But here you can see it's a bit more floppy, it's not curving, and that's exactly what I want. Now I can reassemble my ceiling pieces because this is going to be the floor of the second floor rooms, and it has to be an exact match because it's going to sit just perfectly on top of the ceiling. I had prepped 2 pieces of big foam board but decided that would be wasteful, so I found a smaller piece that could continue this pattern, and I could save the other piece for later. This is going to be a double layered floor for strength for me to build the second floor walls on, so I do want it to be double foam board. I got tired of sitting on the floor, so I decided to do the second part of this on my desk. So I just used the piece that I previously cut and traced around it and cut it out again. So now that I have 2 pieces that are exactly the same, one of them has horizontal lines cut to reduce warp, and one of them has vertical lines cut to reduce warp. This means when I put them together, they won't have lines going the exact same way, which is what I want. Lines going in the opposite directions means it can lay flat, but still be strong once it's connected. Speaking of connecting things, I'm going to be using this seam tape, which was suggested to me by a video I saw from Queen City Minis. I will link that down below along with her channel. I had never considered using tape before, but I was so fed up with the warp that I was really excited to give this a try. So I will link what I purchased, and then I will also link what Queen City Minis suggested to me. This was incredibly sticky. In the listing it said it was temporary, but this stuff is not temporary. I think they're lying. It's not coming off. So what I did was cover the entire piece of foam board with the tape, and it's kind of nice because you can go at a slow pace. With spreading glue really thin, you had to go fast so it didn't start drying. However, I do feel like you have one shot at this, so I had Mr. Technology come hold the other side of the board to try and help me get this as lined up as possible, which is why you can't see very well.
From here. Thank you.
Then I just made sure to press down all over the top of the board to make sure that the tape had contacted both the underside of this piece and the top of the other piece so that they were stuck together, hopefully forever. This is the flattest piece of joined foam board that I have ever created, and I'm unreasonably excited about it. So I'm looking forward to trying this out more, especially because I like to leave the paper on my foam board because I feel like it makes the foam board that much stronger. So if I'm dealing with paper, the less moisture in my attachment techniques, the better. So for now, I'm going to continue forward with the second floor and start to plan out where the second floor walls are going to be. Yay, second floor! I'm turning over to the second floor plan, which is really exciting because previously I mainly worked on the first floor. So I am going to be adding a few pieces that did bump out during the process of building the first floor that I didn't plan on in the beginning. One of them is the bump out for the stove that's in the kitchen, and the other one is the bump out for the statue display in the dining room. During this part of building, you have to be a bit flexible with your floor plan and willing to move things down, because when you go from a 2D drawing into a 3D house, sometimes you come across surprises and some compromises that you just have to make. As I was transferring the floor plan to the piece of foam board, the first thing I wanted to do was to create the curve for the balcony. And then I also need to create this hallway that goes all the way over to the stairs. The stairs are going to be a little bit hidden on the second floor, but that makes sense because they are attic stairs. I also am having to deal with this opening that for some reason when I originally drew this did not draw on the second floor. So I'm having to work my walls around this because this is the main way for my wires to go from the base where they're all starting up through the house and connect with the upper floors. So once I got that figured out, I could move on to creating the rooms. There is going to be one rounded wall, which I'm going to have to cut into the foam board and force it to bend, but I do think that will be okay. After dealing with some of the biggest structural concerns and some of the outstanding features, I could start sketching in the rooms according to my plan. Having some of the miniature furniture on hand is really helpful when planning out the floor plan because you can actually visualize how these pieces are going to look in the room themselves. So I was really thankful to have these ready while I was planning everything out. I decided to take my own planning advice and pull out some furniture to test these rooms. So I got out some of the Addams Family furniture. I'm using Wednesday's bed to help me in Lydia's room, and I'm using Gomez and Morticia's bed to help me in Charles and Delia's room. And then of course I already have Charles' desk made, so that is going in Charles' study. This is where I started to see the imbalance of the sizes of the room, even though I switched the staircase. So I am going to switch Charles and Delia's bedroom back over to the front of the house, and I'm going to put Charles in the smallest room where he just needs a desk and chair. But Lydia's room is still looking way too small. I kept moving her bed around, trying to figure out the best way to even put it in the room. And then I decided to put it up onto my project to double check and see if I had any spaces that I could shuffle around to get a bit more space. And it turns out I did. So I'm really glad I did this step. Sometimes you need to look at it from all different perspectives, and especially on your project, to see what could be the best option. While I was planning on the foam board, I thought I had to have a walkway that went around this opening where the stairs are going, but actually the floor is supposed to go on top of the stairs, so really I do not need all of this space. So I can take this 3-inch walkway, move it over the top of the stairs, and then get a lot more space back into Lydia's bedroom. So I am going to do that now. I'm going to redraw this, taking into account that I can put flooring over the top of the stairs. Now I have a lot more space for Lydia's bedroom. I still don't know how I'm going to put the bed in there, but for now there's at least room to walk around the bed and maybe put in one other piece of furniture. Here you can see how much room I added just by checking how the stair is going to connect from the lower floor. So I'm really glad I did that before I started building. I also have part of my floor going over this opening where all the wires were going to go. So I'm going to have to cover that up so that I have a clear walkway underneath the arch, which leads to the back hallway. So I'm taking a bit of foam board cut exactly to size, and I'm going to push that in so that I have a place to add my flooring later. The last thing I want to do before I commit to this floor plan is look at my 3D model I built way in the beginning. This is going to help me visualize what the third floor is going to look like, make sure that my staircases and everything that's going underneath the third floor is going to connect. And now it's time to commit. We're gonna start building a few walls. I couldn't finish this video without building something, so I'm gathering all of my supplies. I had one piece of double thick foam board that I glued previously for the first floor, so I'm going to be using that, but the next time I make double thick foam board walls, I am going to try the tape method. I'm still going to be gluing on one solid wooden piece. These are my dowels that kind of help make sure that my foam board walls stay strong. As I'm starting here, I want to start with walls that are a 90-degree angle. This will just give me a great beginning, knowing that my walls are straight up and down because they have to be up against each other. Now I'm going to work on the stairs. The stairs are going to be really hard to get to as I build more and more walls, so building them first makes sense in my head. At first, I just thought I was going to trace out my stairs that I have on the first floor, but instead I decided to follow this very detailed plan that you can find in this video, which I will link down below, but this is going to help me know that I have enough stairs to reach the length that I need. And it's also a good technique for making a set of stairs that has a platform in the center, so definitely check that video out if you're interested. So I'm going to begin adding these to my walls. I'm not going to be super detailed on each step of how the stairs are going in because these are permanent as opposed to the stairs in the video I showed you. I'm just going to be gluing them in as I go along. But now I have my two stair segments that are going against the wall. I made copies of each one. This way I have two pieces that I can span my steps across, and this one you can see has a little opening, and that's because I realized there's going to be this space underneath the stairs, and I thought it would be a cool little like Easter egg or a cool place that I could add in some more Beetlejuice hidden secrets underneath the stairs. I'm checking everything as I go along, and once I'm happy, I'm going to start gluing things in place. Starting with the lower run of stairs, I'm gluing the two pieces opposite of each other to make sure that everything will match up. Then I'm cutting down some cereal box material and I'm going to glue it on the front of the steps first. Then I'm going to cut pieces that have a little extra lip, and this is going to go on the actual stair step, and I'm going to do that all the way up this set of stairs. When I get to the top, I'm going to create the landing. It has a little bit of an overhang, but mostly sits perfectly flush with the edges of the foam board. Once that's complete, I can start the same exact process for the upper set of stairs, making sure that it sits flat on the landing I just created. So here's how it looks once I have both of these stair runs completed. I started to add some timber underneath because I do think this would be fun to paint brown so it looks like a really old attic stairway storage space, and put some surprises inside of there. Now that this is complete, I will feel much more comfortable adding in other walls because I know the staircase is not going anywhere and it is in the spot that I wanted it to be. Here's how it looks on top of the first floor. It is honestly so weird for me to see something sitting on top of the Beetlejuice house like this. It makes me want to go pick it up and like take it off because to me it looks like something foreign and it looks so plain from the front of the house. But if you go to the side, you can see it's an actual staircase and the beginning of a really cool staircase, I hope. Before I build any of the walls for the bathroom, I need to complete this stairwell finish because it's going to be really hard to reach once this final wall goes in. I'm going to have to cut a new wall, but as you can see, it's going to be a very narrow space. Now that my wall is complete and looking completely old, I can cut the new wall that is going to go on the other side. This is all the double thick foam board that I have left that I had previously glued together, so I do need to make some more of this. I am going to be using some of the new methods that I talked about in the last video where I started the second floor. Because these boards are already warped, I am going to take my craft knife and score along the top line of the paper on both sides. I'm doing this in just a few places to relieve the tension of the paper. The paper is what likes to warp. I am still going to use the tape method because I thought that was really handy. However, I did have some comments over the possible longevity or lack of longevity of the tape, and I really don't know the chemical makeup of this specific tape, so I do think it will be a good idea to add a few drops of wood glue here and there to make sure that the wood glue holds over the years, even if the tape does dry out at some point. So I'm going to add wood glue here and there and allow the tape to do the initial bonding process and go around the edges with the glue. This method still helps combat warping because I'm not putting glue over the entire thing, it's just in a few spots, and it allows me to still have a strong bond that will last over time. I still had to be really careful about how I was putting these boards together because once that tape connects, it is stuck for good. I wasn't perfectly lined up on this one, but it was good enough to create a wall segment. So it is immediately bonded because of the tape, and then the glue will continue to dry over time. I cut out my wall segment from this piece, added some wood on either end. I will link the video down below where I talk about how I do all my wall segments. I did a lot of explaining on the first floor, so you can check that out if you're interested. And then I traced where my stairs were going to be on here, and I started to do the same process I previously did on the other walls, except this time it was a little easier because I could do this flat on my work surface. So now I can connect it all together. I am again going to dry fit everything just to double check that I'm very happy with how it is turning out. As you can see here, I also detail painted the edge of this because I do want gray walls here and I want to make sure that I did the detail painting before the walls go together. I'm using Fabrifix glue because it has a low moisture content in it, and I'm just going to go along my wall that I'm adding, and then I'm going along the edge of the stairs to make sure a lot of glue gets there and these pieces go together permanently. I'm gluing down the entire base of this wall, and I'm using my 1, 2, 3 blocks to push up against it to make sure that it is sitting along the lines that I have previously drawn for my floor plan. Now that it's glued, you can see how it is looking, and you can see the very skinny space that is created by these two walls being next to each other. The final step is to put this piece in, which is going to close off this area as the stairwell, because in the movie I do believe it is behind a door. And now this area is complete with newspapers and some structural looking pieces, so it does look like the stairwell that goes all the way up to the attic. Now that the staircase is complete and I don't have to worry about not being able to get into any of those little spaces, I can now work on building the walls for the bathroom, which is going to be another tiny space. The indoor outhouse, as Delia calls it, is one of the few rooms that we do see a before, but we do not see an after on how she renovates it. So this is going to be completely from my imagination and how I think Delia might design a bathroom. I'm starting by cutting out walls. I'm just following my floor plan that I drew onto the floor in my previous video, and I'm cutting out some areas that are going to have doors. This makes the room even smaller because I have to have 2 doors in this space. I also went ahead and cut the outside wall and added 2 pieces of wood. This is going to give the wall strength as I continue to build on top of it. And I had some people say that I cut things perfectly the first time. I do not. I just wanted to show you I had to add some mat board on the end here because I cut it too short, but I just kind of improvise as I go along. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can always fix things as you go. Then I could dry fit my walls in place just to make sure I liked how they were looking, and I did, so I glued it into my bathroom, and I can already see just how small this space is going to be. It looked small on the floor plan, but it looks even smaller when the walls are there. I did not get to putting in this outside wall. I still have it wallpapered and ready to go. However, I was running out of space. I want to put a giant window in this wall, and by doing that, you will be able to see the bathroom without me having to create a removable wall in this very tiny area. However, that is a project for another video. I also need to make the 2 doors. One of them goes into Charles' study and one of them goes into Lydia's room. When I last did any building on this project, it was this little bathroom area. I didn't finish up this exterior wall because I didn't know quite what I wanted to do here, but now I need to make sure it's in place before I can build Lydia's walls. The first thing I need to do is make sure it fits well. It is not fitting up against the edge correctly so that it's a perpendicular wall. So I cut out these 2 grooves, which are going to correspond to the side walls of the bathroom and allow the wall to fit a little bit better. Before I permanently install it, I need to cut a hole for the window and install the window. This is going to be much easier to do before it's glued in place. I'm first cutting through the layer of wallpaper, and then I can continue to cut all the way through the double layer of foam board. This window is going to be the only way the viewer of this dollhouse can see into the bathroom. There's not going to be a removable wall or anything. Here you can see the grooves that I was talking about with these walls. They were just making the wall stick out a little bit too much, and I'm trying to keep this house as perpendicular to the floor as possible. So once I had everything in place, the wall was fitting so much better with those grooves cut into the foam board. And that's one of the beauties of building with foam board. You can literally just cut into it if you need a bit more space. This would be a lot more difficult with wood. After adding glue to the base and the little gaps that I created for the wall to fit, I used some masking tape and some carefully placed 1 through 3 blocks so that everything could dry and be really secure. This wall is going to be the foundation for building the rest of Lydia's walls, so I had to make sure it was right. Here's the view through the window. It's going to have really good lighting because without a good light, it's almost impossible to see all the cute little miniatures that are inside. Now I can get to the focus of this video, which is building Lydia's room. I'm starting with the same process I've done a million times, which is making the double thick foam board walls. They are all 9 inches long, so I just keep making the same thing over and over again. Once I have my wall ready, I can check and see how long I need to create the first piece. This is going to be a weird shaped room, but honestly, to get everything into this dollhouse, everything is turning into a weird shaped room. But I'm just going a piece at a time, making sure that it fits and then gluing it in place. I'm going to go pretty quickly through these walls because you've seen me put up walls several times, and it's the same process. Just cut, make sure it fits, and go very slowly and cautiously. Occasionally, I also added in some of the furniture that I have already made for this room to make sure everything was looking the way I wanted it to. As much as I can put the furniture on top of a flat floor plan, it starts to look so much more different and act different once there are 9-foot walls around the perimeter. I ended up having to cut a little bit of the bed off of the back. It's not anything that's going to make any difference, but it definitely helps it fit in the room. The door is looking incredibly large, but that's because there is a transom in this door. So the door is going to be a lot smaller than the opening. You'll see what that looks like in a bit. To make it easier for future Aira to wallpaper this room, I want to add a flat piece of mat board over this area that has the wooden dowel. So I shaved it down so that there would be a snug fit with the mat board across this corner without it taking up that much more room in this already tiny space. Once I had the fit, I could mark off where it needed to be cut and then glue the entire thing in place. This is going to make this area of the room so much easier to wallpaper because I'm just adding it against a flat wall instead of trying to deal with my support dowels. Then I continually went around the edge, adding one piece at a time, slowly adding glue, and it starts to become a room, which is really exciting. Now this wall I struggled with if I should put the window here or if I should put it on the other wall. But because this room is so tight in space, it all has to do with the furniture. And once I put the furniture in and did a test run, this vanity really needs to go against this wall. And if I put the window there, the vanity would cover up the window. So I decided no window, and I'm going to put it into the removable wall that I will make next. When it came to building the magnet wall, I wanted to match the crease line that is on the lower level, so I initially cut it very wide and started to realize this is going to cut off a lot of the viewing area to Lydia's room. So I had to change up my idea, but I ended up cutting these pieces down. These are the pieces that are going to hold the pin nails so that I had more viewing space into the room when the wall is removed. Here are the pin nails embedded into the foam board, and once those are put in place with a piece of paper over it, I call them dollhouse band-aids. Once those are complete, I can glue them in place and know that I have a decent area for the viewer to look through into her bedroom. I added some 1, 2, 3 blocks while they dried and a bit of masking tape at the top to make sure it was tight against the next wall. This is why building the bathroom wall first was so important. Now I can build the actual wall that has the magnets embedded in it. I first cut the piece that's going to close the gap, and then I made a second piece that's going to go on the interior. I added the carpet tape and the wood glue to that piece so that I could put it in place, and this is going to be the best way for me to make sure that I get a 2-part wall that fits in the gap I created. I used the masking tape to hold it in place while I added the other piece, and masking tape was working quite well. But here you can see a finished 2-part wall that has wings that are going to match this area. I added in the magnets that are going to correspond with the pin nails, and now I have a completed magnet wall that is going to fit in this gap and be removable for those that want to peek into Lydia's room. This is the wall that's going to need the window, and because there's not photos of this side of the house, I am going to try and line the window up with the center of the bathroom window and the vertical center of the window that I put in the kitchen. All of these windows are going to look completely different. It's definitely a collection of different window styles, but I think this is the best way to make it look cohesive and planned without actually knowing what it should look like. So now I can dry fit the door with the transom, and you can see how the transom makes it look so much larger. The door will most likely not open in any direction over time, it will just stay closed, but this did help me see a problem or a design flaw in my house. As you can see, the stairs rise up above the upper level, and that is going to cause a problem because my stairs go up about 1/8 inch above my level floor of all the rooms. I realize this is about 3 layers worth of mat board, so to fix this problem, I am going to raise the floor of Lydia's room by 3 layers of mat board. Thankfully, I have a box where I save all of my mat board cutoffs, so I'm essentially going to puzzle piece these all together, and this is going to help me save some of my uncut mat board for future projects and not feel like I'm just wasting it on a problem that I essentially created for myself. I knew the stairs were too tall, yet I put them in anyway, and I didn't make up for that when I was building the second floor. So I guess we would call this my punishment. Lifting Lydia's floor and the area around the staircase was not what I thought I would be doing today, but it's done. I used the scraps from my mat board scraps and just kind of puzzle pieced 3 layers of flooring on top of my foam board floor. And now everything is level around the staircase. I can continue forward specifically with this room, and I will work on the rest of the floors down the road. Once I buckled down and just kind of accepted that this was something I needed to do now, it only took me an hour, which isn't too bad, but it was one of those things where I can either let this defeat me and I just stop working on it, or I can just buckle down, put 3 layers of mat board on the floor, and move forward. So I'm glad I did that. I still have more in here, which is great. I'm going to continue saving my scraps, and then when I get to Charles' office and Charles and Delia's room, I guess I can say I already know what I'm doing because I've done this one. I had to cut out a bit more room at the top of the door opening in order to get the door back in place because I had raised the floor up, so I just cut through the foam board, and thankfully it fit, and I have a functioning door that can now fit past the top of the staircase stairs. I still have to create a floor that goes up in the hallway, so we'll get to that eventually. My ultimate goal is to do the rest of the house. Right now it's about 1.5 floors, and it needs to be 3.25 floors. I don't know if I'm going to do this video in 2 parts, so if I am, this is going to be the first part of the video where I finish off the 2nd floor. I'm starting with one 9-inch wall, which matches the height of every single wall I've made in this entire project. And then I also made a 9 3/8 inch height wall, and I will show you why. As I said, my 9-inch wall is going to match every other wall I have previously built. And these walls are all sitting on top of a double foam board floor that I created specifically for the 2nd floor. So those are my 9-inch walls. The 9 3/8 inch walls are going to be sitting on top of the lower floor walls, so they need that extra height to make up for the fact that they're not sitting on the floor. This area in front is going to be Charles and Delia's room. In the back of this floor, we have already created Lydia's room, which is the purple room. I created the bathroom that's only viewable through this really small window. And then this back corner is going to be Charles' study area. And then we have the stairway on the side. I'm going to start with Charles' area because that's going to be the easiest and most straightforward to build. Because all of these walls are sitting on top of a foam board floor, I am using the 9-inch walls. I'm also continuing to use these square dowels that I've been using throughout the entire project. As I'm going along, I'm trying to make sure that I'm adding my windows as I'm building the walls. It's much easier to cut the windows as I go. I'm also being very mindful that I need to add in magnet walls for each room that I'm creating. This area is going to be the magnet wall for Charles' study, which is going to give the viewer a glimpse into the space. I have an entire video dedicated only to magnet walls if you want to see how I specifically put them together. I will link that down in the description box if you're interested in learning more about how I put these walls together. But for now, I'm going to kind of gloss over them pretty quickly and keep going on the build. I finished Charles' office, so that means the entire back half of the 2nd floor is complete. So now I need to turn my attention to the front part of the 2nd floor, which will be a little more complicated. This area has the one and only curved wall in this entire project. Everything else has been angled and just like a straight wall. So I am glad I have a wall to show you how I would construct something like that, because I know many of you have been following this series in order to create your own foam board house. I am going to first start on this side and start connecting the stairwell with everything, and then by the time we get here, we're going curved. Before I construct any walls, I am going to cut a hole in the area above the fireplace. I am making holes here and there that I know is going to be covered by walls to help me run any electricity up through the house. And I don't know if I'll run anything here, but it's going to be an area that's not used, so I might as well, just make it easier if I do need to use it in the future. This wall needed a little cutout so it fit snug against the back of the staircase. So I cut that first, and you will see that this wall does not remain one entire piece, but I did start out by creating one entire piece that's going to cover this area. I also created another piece that's going to cover the back of the stairwell to create a solid room. At this point, I did a lot of staring and thinking. The magnet walls are getting much more complicated as the house gets taller. I'm having to balance making sure that the house still looks good when it's all closed up or when the magnet walls are open, with making sure that people who are viewing the house can still have a good look inside. So it's just one of those things I'm having to carefully think about. I ended up cutting the end of this wall off just after the chimney. Cutting it off at the chimney makes for an oddly shaped magnet wall, but it does help me keep the front of the house more intact. So that's why I made that decision. I had to be careful here because I was now adding walls that were just freestanding, and whenever I do that, I like to make sure I add 2 walls that are at an L. This makes sure that they are at a 90-degree angle. And once I'm certain that those walls are dry and in place, I can start to fill in the magnet wall, making sure that it fits snugly between the front wall and the chimney. To create this oddly shaped magnet wall, I made each part of the wall separately. First the inside piece and then the outside piece to make sure it matched up with the wall correctly. And then I glued them together in place to make sure that everything was in the right spot. While that was drying off to the side, I decided to go ahead and create the chimney, which is just going to be a hollow foam board piece. I traced out the edge that is up against my magnet wall, and then I folded the piece so that it was symmetrical, and then I could add it back in place to make sure that I liked how it looked. Once I was happy with the shape, I cut all of the pieces out of a single layer of foam board, made sure it was the right distance from the wall so that it matched the fireplace area below on the first floor. And then I could glue everything in place, replace the magnet wall, and we have finished this side of the project. Before we finally create that curved wall, there is one more interior wall I need to create that the curved wall is going to connect with. The hallway that comes from the stairwell and Charles' office is supposed to have an archway that connects it with the balcony area. The first thing I'm going to do is actually chop off some of this foam board very carefully by hand, because when I add this center wall, I am going to be adding a piece of wood, and I want it to butt up against the foam board as best as possible. Then I can cut that to size so it doesn't jut out into my balcony walking area, and glue it up against the piece of foam board that I just cut. This is going to give me that little turn that I need in the hallway to connect with the archway. Once that's complete, I can cut down this piece of foam board that I'm going to cut my archway out of. I want to make sure that it fits perfectly in between these pieces of foam board because it is going to be very noticeable when you look up into this area. Because of the thin foam board legs on either side of the archway, this is going to be a little bit difficult to glue in place. So I decided to glue one side of the archway and the upper corner on the other side while leaving the lower leg unglued. I let everything dry in place, and then I could go back and add glue to a piece of paper, put it into the gap between the leg and the wall, and focus on getting this piece in place perfectly. This helped me not feel like I had to juggle too many wet glue areas at once, and I could really focus on lining the walls up the way I wanted them to be. I added some 1, 2, 3 blocks to keep it in place, and then I could move on to my curved wall. The curved wall is actually going to go behind this flat wall, so at this point I'm just trying to gauge how much foam board I need to cut for my curved wall. The method I'm about to show you, I'm sure you've seen used before or even used it yourself. What I'm going to do is take a single piece of foam board, so this is not double thick, and I'm going to leave my area that is straight wall. I'm going to leave the area which is the door. I am actually going to cut a little bit of the door, but the rest of it is going to have several long vertical cuts into the foam board that I can then bend. Now the cuts are only halfway through the foam board because I'm only cutting through one layer of paper. I'm leaving the other layer of paper intact so that when I do start to bend the foam board into a curved shape, the paper that is left intact kind of keeps everything together. Once I was happy with my cuts, they're about every ½ inch or so, I started to bend the foam board, making sure that it popped and broke at every single one of those cuts, and then I was able to start fitting it into place. The wall is currently too long for the space, but that's fine. I'd rather it be too long than too short. So as I'm fitting it, I'm starting to cut it down to make sure that it's fitting exactly against the wall the way that I wanted to. And I did have to cut it down just slightly a couple times until I liked how it looked. Then I cut out the door, which made this a very flimsy piece because it's only being held together by a ½ inch at the top, and that's because this is going to be a door with a transom in it, so it's a very tall door. I'm starting by gluing the edge that is the most important to me to the side of the archway. I want this to be lined up, and I can always adjust the edge that's being hidden behind the straight wall. And I'm showing these gluing processes because sometimes it's just as important how you glue a piece in as much as it is to cut the right size piece. Because if you have the right size piece and you don't glue it in correctly, then you can still have an issue. So once I was happy with how the curved wall was sitting, I glued the flat part of the wall behind the previous flat exterior wall. And then I clamped it and let it dry. I'm now cutting an exact replica of the wall I just put in place, and I'm going to trace where the door is. The reason I can't cut the door in the exact same location is because once things start to curve, it can sometimes skew your measurements. So it's going to be much more accurate for me to trace it with it sitting directly behind the wall it's supposed to accompany. I added some carpet tape and glue. The carpet tape is going to take hold immediately, so I had to be really careful about how I applied this, but I felt like it was going to be the best way to make sure that there was very little warp when it came to this wall because I did not want to rip it out and do it again. Just like before, I lined up the curved part first, and then I could glue down the straight part. All of the 9-inch walls that are actually sitting on the foam board floor of the second floor are now complete. There's one more wall that needs to happen in Charles and Delia's room, but I am not going to worry about that until I'm actually working on the interior of the room. What I'm going to do now is lower my adjustable desk. I'm going to move the first floor over here, and then I'm going to build the rest of the exterior walls on top of the first floor. That's going to help me make sure that everything lines up and everything connects because this area right here is open to the first floor. It's like a 2-story atrium type of thing. We're getting there. It's just step by step by step. One step forward, one step forward, one step forward. And eventually it'll be done. Not gonna lie, I was a little bit nervous about starting this process. This was going to be the first time I was building walls without a foundation, and they were just going to kind of be floating on lower walls. And I'm hoping this is a good choice, but it was the only way I could see getting things to work for this opening in the middle of the house. So I'm starting with this wall coming straight off of the exterior wall I built for Charles and Delia's room. There's going to be a little bit of a notch in the lower corner. I could have used a 9-inch wall there, but for structural purposes, I wanted an entire wall that spanned from the 9-inch walls over to the tower. Here you can see on my model that there are 2 big windows here, and I'm still trying to process the best place to put all of my magnet walls. And so I think this is going to be the best option for a look into the atrium. So I'm going to make a magnet wall, but it's going to be inset where the windows are. And in the future, when I create the windows, I want to create some 3D printed windows out of a really strong filament. So it continues to strengthen this wall when the windows are in place, because I just cut a big part out of the center. This was my first magnet wall that didn't go from ceiling to floor, but I think this was the best way to do it. And this wall alone took me 2 hours to put together. So I wanted to make sure and point that out because it's just about 10 seconds in video. But in real time, each one of these walls is taking time to think out, to process, to build, and then sometimes rebuild if I change my mind. So if you're following this process and making some of your own foam board walls and it's taking you a while, it took me a while too. Before continuing with the tower that goes above the door, I decided to start on the other side with the other wall that's going to attach to the 9-inch walls that are on the floor. This one is going to be part of the stairwell, and it also has this little opening that more wires can go up inside of. So I'm continuing to create the foam board borders around this space. And I'm making sure to match up anywhere there is a square dowel from the floor below. I'm continuing the square dowel up above. When there's a floor in between, I'm not worrying about it too much. But when there's no floor in between, I want to make sure those dowels are on top of each other to continue to provide support when I add the attic and the 3rd floor. Of course, by the time I got to the last wall, that's all I had left, so I had to create a new wall segment that was going to be the front of the tower. And because I went from both of the outside sides in, I felt like my walls were pretty strong and at 90-degree angles. I do need to add this little circular window that is on my model, and it's actually a pretty small window. It kind of looks ridiculous. I think they did that on purpose in the design of this window on the tower, but I'm going to add that to the very front before I glue it in between the square dowels. Once that wall was in place, the walls were basically complete for the 2nd floor. However, I was too scared to lift it off of the 1st floor because there is no support for these walls. So if I move it the wrong way, they could crumple. So I'm going to create a false ceiling inside the tower using this piece of foam board. This is going to give some horizontal support to my vertical walls. It's going to make sure that those 90-degree angles stay 90 degrees even when I lift it off of the 1st floor. So I'm gluing those in place anywhere I have a 90-degree angle. And this was easy for the inside of the tower. However, I need to be careful about where I add it to the open atrium area. So instead of adding the support on the inside of the room, I'm going to add it on the outside. And this is what's going to become the soffit to the roof when the roof is created in the next video. This is a little bit dangerous to add because I don't know what my roof is going to look like yet, but I do know that I can kind of change things up as I go along because foam board is pretty easy to cut through, thankfully. Now this is going to give me that horizontal support all along the edge that previously was not supported. And this is going to help me move my 2nd floor and not worry about my vertical walls folding. The 2nd floor is now built, for the most part. I have 2 mistakes that I need to fix. The first mistake is small. The second mistake is big. First mistake, I forgot the window on this wall. So I'm just going to very carefully take my time and cut out another little circle that matches this one on this wall. So easy fix, not that big of a deal since I haven't done any finishes yet. The second mistake was actually a purposeful decision that I now regret. This is mistake number 2, where you can see the stairwell. When I originally built the stairs, I built it right up to the edge and I didn't leave any room for a closing door. I thought it would be cool to always be able to see into these stairs, as if there was maybe like a pane of glass that you could look through and see the stairs that go up into the attic. But now that I have built more of the house and there's closing walls for every single little peek inside the house, it doesn't really make sense anymore for this area to just always be open. I don't know why I did that. I do think I have a solution that will work, and it wasn't something that I could figure out until I had already built the 2nd floor. So let's go ahead and fix those mistakes before I officially end the video. We'll start with what I thought was going to be the easy one, and honestly, cutting the window well, it was a little bit more difficult because I'm trying to hold on to these walls, and I had to pull the foam board out with this set of pliers. And then I found a lovely surprise on the inside, which is going to be future Aira's problem, but it actually butts up against the wall that I built on the inside for my wiring. So I'm gonna figure that out in the future, but I am still glad I added this window because it's part of the original house design and I want it to be there. So we'll figure that out later. Moving on to mistake number 2, what I'm going to do here is build a false wall on the outside. And this is going to allow me to continue this wall above and cover up the stairwell opening. Now I do have to be mindful that this is a magnet wall here for the fireplace on the first floor. So I have to make sure that I cut this wall apart and allow this opening to still be able to open. Because my foundation is already built, I am beveling the bottom of this wall to make it not look like it's supposed to hit the foundation, like it was a purposeful part of the design. And then I'm going to glue the wall onto the outside. It doesn't give any structural support, it doesn't give any extra space to the inside of the room. All it does is try to make sense of the wall that I am now going to be building above it on the second floor. I'm actually very lucky that the chimney is in this area because I can hide this mistake against the chimney and you won't really be able to tell that I'm adding this extra wall in here. I do want to still be able to see into the stairwell because they do show the characters in the movie going up and down the stairwell a lot. So I'm going to be creating a magnet wall that is removable and makes a little bit more sense with the rest of the project. I'm lining it up with the fireplace below. I'm just hoping that it doesn't look too much like a geometric mess once I'm done with all of the lines that I'm cutting into the side of this house. And then I'm adding another magnet wall against the wooden dowel on the other side of the stairs. Now I can create the magnet wall that goes inside of this space and covers it up. However, it was still sticking out, and that's because I built it right up to the edge. My solution for this was to use the properties of foam board, trace the edge of the stairs, and then cut them out of the foam board and just slowly pull the foam out so that it fit more snug against the edge of the stairs. And when that wall is pulled out, I think it'll be kind of cool because it will look as if the wall is actually being pulled away from the stairs. I will just have to make sure I paint it that way so it looks like it's exposing structure. So now I have all of these magnet walls in this one side of the house. It's time to take a look at our final second floor build. This video I am working on the roof, and the roof has a lot of angles, shapes, and I'm not as certain on the pieces I need to cut as I was previously for the second floor. The second floor all had walls that needed to be the same height. This is going to be very, very different. So I would rather use cardboard that was just going to go in the recycle bin anyway to build it first. And then I will replace the pieces with the foam board, which is much more expensive. We are going to be building from here up. And as you can see, there are a ton of roof angles, and I'm not even sure if I like how it looks here in the back, so I might change some things up. I want to get the general shape of the iconic Beetlejuice house, but there is a little wiggle room and you don't see a ton from the back in the images. So essentially I'm going to be building the roof twice, but I think it's going to save a lot of frustration. I'm going to begin by finding the largest piece of cardboard that I have, hopefully one that will fit over the entire top of the dollhouse. I'm weighing it down, so hopefully it doesn't move on me, and then I'm going to trace all around the edge of the second floor. There's going to be a ton of tracing in this entire video. Just so you know, this is kind of the key to making sure everything fits as I build up. So I'm going to carefully cut out my traced shape that I just got from the very top edge of my second floor. Now I can test my cardboard piece on top of the second floor. As you can see here, there are several layers. There's actually 4 foam board layers between the first floor and the second floor. There's going to be a similar amount of layers between the second floor and the third floor, which is the attic space in the roof. However, I'm not going to cut all of those pieces. That would just be a lot of work to cut every single piece. All I need is this top piece in order to get the shapes for the roof. So I'm going to skip all of this and I will figure all of that out with the foam board. All I'm getting is the upper shapes for the roof. So moving on. Speaking of shapes, let me show you some of the major shapes we are trying to figure out when it comes to this roof. There are 3 shapes that I'm going to be starting with. There is this triangular prism right here. So it's this long triangle that goes the entire length of the house. And then there is another triangular prism, this one right here, that also goes the length of the house and intersects with this triangular prism. So there's kind of a cross right here. So these are the 2 major shapes I'm going to be working with when I first start to figure out my roof. The other major shape is going to be this cube that sits on top of the tower, and then there is a mansard roof that sits on top of the tower. So these are the major shapes that I'm starting with because I know that these are the shapes that are going to make the roof look like the Beetlejuice house roof. The tower shape is going to be the easiest place to start because it is already a shape that is defined by the floors underneath it. So I can just extend the walls that are already created on the second floor up to the third floor. I'm going to use the same wall height I've used everywhere else in the project. So these are going to be 9-inch walls that are continuing up the tower. I'm gluing everything down with hot glue because eventually I may be ripping parts of this roof off when I start creating the foam board version, and so hot glue is pretty easy to rip off or remove. I'm going to be leaving this wall unattached. I'm just going to tape it on because I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to cut into this wall, so instead of attaching it now, I'm just going to leave it loose and it makes that part of it easier later. Now that the tower is extended, I can start figuring out the first triangular prism or gable roof, which is going to go from where my arm is all the way over to the tower. Figuring out the right size triangle is going to be the very first step, and it's going to define everything. Cut out the triangle roof shape that I feel like I need right here. However, it's not wide enough because when I get to this point here, I would really love the roof to be sitting almost like that. Oh, maybe I need to line it up with this edge. But if I line it up with the edge, my chimney does not go up the center of this line. I thought I was going to have my chimney go up the center of the triangle, but if I line it up like this, it does not. So I just kind of have to decide if I want to extend my roof back or if I want the chimney to go up the center like it does in the original build. So this is one reason it is going to be so much better for me to figure this out with cardboard, because I cut all of these 3 pieces, but I might need to cut them all again to a different shape if I decide to try something different. I cut my ideal triangle roof shape for this side of the tower. Would probably sit about right here, which means my chimney is going to go up right here. Definitely not in the center like you would hope. So I'm having to make a compromise here on how this is working. Also, making this compromise solves a problem over in this staircase. Let me move the camera and I'll show you. So with the initial triangle shape that worked the best for this side of the house where the chimney goes up, if you can see, there's not that much headroom between, this is the staircase that goes up. So you'd be walking up. You literally have to crawl to get underneath this piece of roof right here to get into the attic. So this is another reason or another problem that is solved by using this roof instead. Because if I have this roof here, now we have all of this space to where someone can come and enter the attic. So this is going to be ideal for this staircase, for that side of the roof. The only thing that's not ideal about it is that the chimney is not coming up in the correct spot, but I am okay with that sacrifice because this is where it needs to be, because down here is the area where the fireplace is in the lower room. So this isn't going to look exactly right. We're just going to move on and be okay with it. And it is what it is. It means I do not have to move my stairs, which I am so thankful for. You might have noticed the tiny tab on the front of my triangle. This is just letting me know how far back the triangle is from the front of the tower. So that's letting me know where it would sit in accordance to the rest of my roof. Once I was happy with the size and with my compromise, I cut multiple of the same triangle and then I started to glue them onto my rooftop. These triangles are going to be the support that helps keep my gable roof up, spanning across the entire width of the house. I'm gluing them in place now, but I will have to tear them out a little bit later. As you see, they are solid triangles, which means there's no room to move around inside of that space. I will figure that out later. For now, I'm just figuring out the exterior look of the roof, and then I can backtrack. I'm cutting some large rectangles to cover the outside of these triangular supports, and this is going to be my gable roof pieces. I'm taping them in place because I also know I will have to cut into these later. But for now, I have finished my first triangular prism shape, and I like how it's looking with the rest of the project. I tried out a couple of my previous cut triangles and those didn't work. It needs to line up with the edge of the wall so it looks like one continuous shape going up from the second floor, and it needs to be slightly taller than my previous roof. So once I found a triangle that fit those requirements, I cut again 4 triangles that are going to be the support for this second gable roof that's going to run from the front of the house to the back. 2 of the triangles are going to sit in front of my previous roof, and 2 of the triangles are going to sit in the back. I am going to make this gable roof in 2 different pieces because it's just going to be hard to cut it correctly to fit over the previous roof. So what I'm doing is getting the angle off of the previous roof, marking it with a pencil, and then I'm going to cut down the shape and make sure it fits along with my structure. And then I can cut 2 of these shapes, add some tape, kind of like a hinge, and drape it over my triangle structure. This gives me the first part of the roof, and now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the front section of the roof, cut 2 of the exact same shapes. As you can see, they kind of meet in the middle. I am going to have to cut it off a little bit because they're just kind of fighting with each other over that center space. I'm just going to cut a big gap there. And later, when I finish the roof, I will have to solve that intersection so it looks like one complete piece. You will notice that I keep adding my roof back onto my dollhouse. This is because I am continually checking to make sure everything is working. I'm going to turn it around for you so you can see what I am seeing. And as you can tell, the back section is still missing that roof part that I'm still not quite sure how it's going to look. The section under this back gable roof does look like it's missing a big chunk. I will add that in when I do the foam board part. For now, I'm just kind of getting everything into my head. And I also am missing this part of the chimney. And now you can see what I was meaning by the stairs needing a little bit more space to get up into the roof. I am so happy I went with a different size triangle and saved the stairs. Now I need to focus on this back area. I think I'm just going to build this original roof that I had the idea for. It is going to be a bit more complicated because it's not a straight wall. But I am just going to start with a wide triangle that's a bit shorter than the rest of the roof pieces. I don't really want it to stick out. I want it to kind of blend in with the rest of the roof because it's not really a focal point. I'm only cutting 2 triangles for this section because it's going to be a relatively short roof compared to the previously built gable roof pieces. I cut the 2 exterior pieces to match up with the structure, and then I'm just going to tape them on so that I can see what it's looking like once this piece is installed. Here's how it's looking with all of the triangular prisms in place, and I think I'm still going to go with the same design that I had on my sample model. And I think particularly here you can see how I have some bump outs in the house, and I have not counted for those with these exterior walls. The reason for that is it's going to be much easier for me to build these smaller walls up inside of an extended eave. Like right here, I'll build the wall out a little bit, so this will just be a little bit of a deeper overhang than it will be here. So just to show you an example of what I'm talking about with this area right here, I would just extend the wall up like this. So there would be this wall pop out that's separate from this one, but they're both underneath the same triangle roof. Now that I have the exterior of all the roof pieces figured out, I can start to think about the interior because I do want there to be a scene inside of this roof. It's actually a pretty important scene. So the first thing I'm doing is tracing around the exterior walls so I know where they hit the roof pieces. Then I can take a pin or something and mark where I think the openings need to be. I want to have most of the roof areas accessible to the other areas to make it seem like a character could walk from one part of the roof to the other. In the movie, the area where the Maitlands are, where the big diorama is, it does look like a very large space. So I want to get that feeling in my own roof that I'm creating. I'm going to cut through one piece at a time, making sure that I reconstruct my roof to see if I like how it's looking on the inside. Many of these triangles are going to have the interior cut out, so they look more like support beams that are holding the roof up, and then my characters could walk underneath the beams to access the rest of the roof. I also wanted to make sure that I could access the inside of the tower. That may be where I put the brick wall where they draw a door. I'm not quite sure where that wall is going to go yet. But once I had all of my interior pieces cut out, I added back the exterior roof, and then it's kind of hard to tell what the inside looks like. So I had to send in my trusty phone so I could see, like, does this look right? Is this what it would look like inside of a roof? And thanks to my phone and a flashlight, I think it's looking pretty good. This was my little test view inside of the roof space. Stairs are always such a difficult thing to connect and actually make them look like they would function as part of the house. A lot of kits just come with kind of a hole in the floor, and a lot of time it doesn't even have the right amount of headspace. So when you're building a dollhouse yourself, you kind of have an opportunity to create a really cool stairwell, but it can just be a head scratcher the whole way through. If I had thought about cutting this hole out to begin with before I glued anything on top of the roof, I would have traced it from the underside and then cut it out from the top, but instead I just used my craft knife to kind of poke through the top as I found the edges of the stairwell connection. So all I did was cut a hole in this area to show kind of the concept of these stairs going up into the roof. And then instead of building the walls, I took the lazy way out and I decided to just trace with a Sharpie where those walls would go. But by doing this, I realized that my walls, which are going to go around the stairs, would really only make for a very small sliver of space where a character could go from this main area of the roof into the back. So I've decided I'm just going to tape this like scrap piece of cardboard here to not cut out this connection, and I'm going to have a separate part of the roof in the back. And this is going to be dedicated to Maitland's storage, so I may add Barbara's horses here that she holds up in the mirror. I may have some other things that are specifically theirs that looks like perhaps Charles and Delia put up in a separate attic storage space. Then I started going around and writing in where I thought my windows were going to go, where the magnet walls were going to go, and this wrapped up my final thoughts and my final planning for this cardboard area. I want to be incredibly exact with this because I do want it to look like it's a continuation. So I'm flipping my second floor upside down. I'm adding some weight to the top so I don't accidentally move it. And then I'm going to carefully trace all the way around the top part of my walls for the second floor. This means I'm going to have an exact piece that's going to sit on top of it, and it won't look it just won't stick out in any places where I may have messed up my trace. Then I slowly went around, I cut out the shapes, and then I had a piece that perfectly fit on top of the second floor. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, there are actually 4 levels of foam board here. The other level is actually the ceiling that goes on top of the second floor. So there's the ceiling and then there's the floor. I Frankensteined some individual pieces of foam board together to create this piece because ultimately it's going to be cut apart anyway, so it does not have to be all one piece like I did for the floor of the rooftop. And at this point my hand was already hurting, but I did have some very nice cut pieces ready to go. I'm going to use my Frankenstein shape that I just cut out to be the ceiling for the second floor. I need to create that before I continue on with the roof. I'm pulling out all of the magnet walls, which give me access to the interior of each room. This is going to allow me to trace around the inside of these spaces, and it's going to give me a map of where my walls touch the underside of the ceiling. Allowing me to create this map is going to let me cut the ceiling apart into individual pieces. It's going to be easier to work on. It's going to be easier to add electricity. And I do have a video that goes over the ceiling process in a little bit more detail, so I will link that in the description box below. But as you can see here, they're like dark purple lines are the lines that are going to be cut apart. So I'm going to have one long ceiling piece that goes over Charles and Delia's room and the study. This is also going to have the opening for the staircase, which I should have cut here, but I did not. You will see me go back and figure out how to do that later. And then I have another piece that goes over Lydia's room and the bathroom, and then the final piece that has the rounded edge to it goes over the open atrium. Just like I did on my previous set of ceilings, I cut out these little butterfly connections that are going to be connected with individual mat board pieces. This helps the individual ceiling pieces stay together as one unit, so I'm not constantly having to readjust them or fight with them if they start coming apart at the interior. So it just kind of connects them back together. I will eventually add magnets that help them stay on top of the walls underneath. It's time to build the actual permanent walls that are going to be on the third floor. I'm pretty much going to build this in the exact same order that I did with the cardboard, but now I have a lot more information to work with. So I know which pieces need to have an opening cut. I know which pieces need to have a magnet wall or a window, so I can feel a lot more confident as I put this together. I'm going to move along with the walls a lot faster than I did with the cardboard. However, if I come up against something, a new idea or a new concept, I will make sure to stop and tell you what I'm doing. So here we go. Foam board wall time. I'm starting with the tower walls again, but this time I have pre-cut the areas that I know are going to connect with the other part of my roof. I've also decided to make the sidewall into a magnet wall. So here is my first area of the roof built in a matter of seconds. Of course, it took me a lot longer than that to actually cut the walls out and get them prepared, but I'm very confident that they are going to work with the rest of my roof thanks to my cardboard model. I can now move on to my first gable roof, which is going to be the long triangular prism that goes from side to side. Thankfully, the triangle I made for my cardboard version still seems to work really well for what I'm doing now, so I went ahead and cut out 3 of these triangle shapes, and then one of them is cut off short on one side so it can fit up against the tower. Thanks to my previous knowledge gained, before I glue these on, I can now cut out the interiors that I know I'm going to need to make this one continuous space. So this is going to be quite a large amount of the inside of this triangle cut out. I am going to leave my exterior triangle that's near the chimney unattached because I'm not quite sure how I'm building these stairs yet. I should have cut out the stair opening, but I did not. Now before I do that, I did realize that these triangle supports that now have the centers cut out are kind of flimsy without anything attached to them. So I'm going to make some supports that are on the inside of the triangles, so if I accidentally do hit them with my elbow, they won't come crumpling down. Which I am going to need some elbow room as I cut out the opening for the stairs. Now, because I did not do this before I started building onto this platform, I am going to have to create a pattern and then apply it to the top of my foam board because I can't flip it upside down. To figure out the exact size hole that I need to cut, I added a piece of paper just between the floor and the top of the walls, and then I used a pencil to trace around the opening. I also marked out where the chimney was on my paper so I know how to line it up when it comes to my project. Now I can cut out the stair-shaped hole and essentially create a pattern that I can use not only on the floor of the attic space, but also on the ceiling piece, which is what you're looking at right here. Both of those pieces are going to have to be cut through so I can connect the stairs from the second floor up into the attic. For this pattern piece, I did use cardstock paper. It's a little bit stronger than computer paper, and it's easier for me to be sure that I'm making confident marks with my pencil and it's not moving around. So I've cut through my ceiling piece and I could add it back onto my project. This is how it's looking. It fits pretty well, so I do feel like this pattern making process did work. I do have to cut one more piece that's going up through the floor of my attic, and then I can add that on top. So those are both done now. As you can see, I have 4 layers of foam board that you can see on the side, just above the walls of my second floor. And now I can focus on the exterior triangle and how I'm going to build that wall around the stair opening. Starting with the exterior wall, I ended up cutting it in 2 pieces, and that's because it does have a piece that kind of goes back behind the chimney. This is going to be a multifaceted wall. I added an extra layer of foam board so that I didn't have to cut like a little tiny minuscule wall between them, but now it fits against the exterior of my house. I glued these in place, and I'm not going to do a magnet wall because I do think it'll be cool to like look up inside the stairs, but I do need to build the walls that go around the stairs, so I temporarily put the side of the roof in place so I could figure out how these walls needed to be shaped. Now I'm doing this very quickly, but it did take me some time to figure these out, and it was just all about testing, fitting, and then retrying it out. I am going to have a fake door in this area. It's just going to be kind of a tight spot to put a real door. I don't even know how many times it would actually be open, but here you can see how the walls work. They just go straight up from the floor and hit the edge of the roof line. So you will be able to look up in this space at the attic door, which I think is kind of cool because cinematically that is how it always looked in the film. And then there will be a fake door on this side. And as you can see, there is a little bit of light bleed, but all of that will be taken care of when I finish the interior of the roof. Now I am going to remove my temporary roof piece here that was helping me figure out the walls, and I'm going to continue to brace and support these areas, The reason for this is I started thinking through the process of how I'm going to finish this interior space, and I am going to need a lot more access than just the magnet walls. So I am going to create this long gable roof piece that goes against the back of this attic room. However, it is only going to be temporarily tacked in place until I get to the point where I'm actually working on the interior. So right now I am cutting this piece. This will be the final piece. I'm just not gluing it down for its final time yet. So I am glad I took the time to put in these temporary braces. I do think they'll make the roof a lot stronger as it's being moved around while I'm working on everything else. I used a couple drops of hot glue on each support piece. This is what's going to tack this piece in place, and then later on I will be able to just simply pop this piece off and have access to the interior from the back. And at that time I can also remove the supports if I feel like that's the best look for the inside. But right now, that's how it's looking. Now I can work on the front wall, which this wall will be permanently put in place because it does have magnet walls in it, and I want to go ahead and create those magnet walls. This rectangular piece is much more complicated than the back piece I just attached because it needs to have the connection from the other gable roof, and it will also contain a magnet wall. So I do want to permanently put this piece in place. I need to make sure that I'm cutting it correctly. I'm using the structural triangle to kind of give me an idea of where this piece is going to hit the roof. It's a little skewed because it lays down at an angle, but then I'm also using that information to help me know where the magnet wall is going to be. And once I cut out the connection and the magnet wall opening, this is what this piece is looking like. I'm going to keep this cut out so I can create my magnet wall with it. I'm also thinking about removing that interior beam. This is going to hurt my structural integrity just a little bit, but I'm okay with doing this because, like I said, this is going to be a wall that is permanently glued in place. So I'm not cutting that beam until the wall is glued and dried. Now I feel much safer about cutting out this beam. I think it's going to give you a much better view of the interior, and I'm going to transfer this beam to the inside opening of this magnet wall. I think it will kind of look like you literally lifted up the rooftop, and I will continue the pattern of the interior roof on the inside of the magnet wall. So this is why I previously marked a line where this piece was going to hit, and I can just attach this beam to the inside of the door. I'm now going to turn this into a magnet connection. After a brief snack and a little bit of a breather, I needed some tea and some crackers. There were actually a lot of rest breaks during this project, but this is the only one pictured. I finished up the magnet wall by adding pin nails and magnets, and it snapped in place and looked nice and clean, so I was very happy with that. Now I can work on the other gable roof that's coming towards the front of the house. I went ahead and cut the window opening for this, which was another tricky circle, and cut out the interior of the triangle. I decided to test fit my cardboard roof to see if it still worked for the pattern. It was a little bit off, but instead of cutting a whole new piece, I just added some more cardboard until I felt it fit snug up against the roof I previously built. Then I could use my adjusted cardboard roof pattern to create two identical pieces and then fit them on to my gable roof. And I'm going to follow the same exact steps I just did to create a magnet wall in this piece as well. I want a lot of viewing space into the attic. With that magnet wall complete, that kind of wrapped up the front part of the roof. So we have the tower and we have the two gable roofs that we can see when we're looking at the front of the house. I am going to spin it around to show you I still have the entire back of the roof to build. Up to this point, it's just kind of been storing scraps of stuff for me, but we are going to continue on. This is going to be the second half of the gable roof continuing from the front. Now I am continuing that little pop out that I didn't consider the first time around. This means I essentially created 3 triangles. One of them is just cut off on the sides to create a small wall that goes above the extension that's on the lower floor. Now this roof actually did fit really well, so I did not have to adjust the cardboard pattern. I just cut out the roof pieces, and this one I'm going to attach in 2 different ways. So I cut the front roof piece in half right at this line you see, and that's because I'm going to permanently install the area with the magnet wall, but the other parts of the roof are just tacked in place because eventually they will have to be removed, so I can remove the other part of the roof. Working on the interiors of this project are making this just way more complicated than it needs to be. So I'm just having to temporarily tack things in place so I can get to it later. So now we can work on this final area of the back roof. This is the shorter but wider triangle that I created. It still worked pretty well as I cut it out previously, so I made 2 of these, and then I made a third piece that is just a section of these triangles, which is going to be this little pop-out wall that I showed you with the cardboard model. It's not going to have anything inside of it. It's just going to be a chunk of wall that's added on to continue the shapes from the lower floors. I added a small piece of foam board in between those 2 layers, and then I was able to test fit my cardboard roof. I did have to adjust this pattern a little bit as well, but it gave me the right shapes that I needed to cover up this area completely. I'm actually contemplating not gluing this part of the roof down, and I'll tell you why. So this roof and this roof are both removable. They've just been tacked down with hot glue, and I've marked them. I've marked any roof that I've just temporarily tacked down with a few drops of glue. I've marked that out with pencil so I remember which one it is, so I'm not trying to rip off a roof that I've taken the time to use tacky glue and just permanently glue it to the structure. So I have this wall and this wall that eventually will be taken off so I can work on the interior. So gluing any part of this down is going to be kind of a hindrance, and I know I want a magnet wall here so that this part can be seen, but I'm not quite sure how I want to build it yet. So I'm thinking I'm just going to leave this piece taped on so it's easier to remove, and when I get to the actual roof structure I can focus on this and build it at that time when I have a clearer idea in my head. I'm happy with how it's looking. I'm happy with how it looks on top of the house. And now we get to build the mansard roof. This is all I have left of my foam board sheets, plus I have a box of scraps. So I'm really hoping I can get my mansard roof out of these pieces and not have to go back to the craft store to get more. As with everything else, I started this project out with tracing. I traced around the top of the tower to get the correct shape for my mansard roof. You would think it would be a perfect square, but by the time we got to the 3rd floor, some of my angles were a little wonky. You cannot tell by just looking at it from the outside, but when you see it traced onto a piece of paper, you're like, wow, those are not 90-degree angles. So I started building my roof. I just got a shape that I thought looked good, looked accurate to what I was looking at in my screen references, and then I cut the shapes that I felt would fit best on the sides. I haven't yet decided if I'm going to have an opening in the mansard roof, and if I am, I don't know if it's going to be the front or the side. I don't know if there's going to be a room in there or if it's just going to be characters like kind of popping out of the roof. I'm not quite sure, so for now, this is all just being tacked together. This is the crowning moment. You guys are seeing it for the first time with me. The final exterior look of the Beetlejuice house. Now there is still a ton of work to do because the 2nd floor and the attic space are still mostly unfinished, but it is just so cool to see it all together and see the possibilities of what it could be when it's completely decked out in Beetlejuice. is a wrap for the foam board building video. I will have all of the individual videos that were edited down to be in this video linked in the description box with the title, so if you are looking for something specific to see the entire video, it's a little bit easier for you to find. I will also have the playlist linked down below, so it's easy for you to kind of scrub through and find the videos that you're wanting. I did want to add in my opinion of working with foam board, just for those who are really curious if I regretted the decision or enjoyed the process. And I will say that I think I would do this again. If I had to build another house completely from scratch, I would go with foam board. However, I would use some of the anti-warping techniques that I learned along the way, such as using the carpet tape with glue in between, and I think that would just make the whole process easier from the beginning because I started with some major warping and had to make up for that. Other than that, I really enjoyed the process of building this house and would definitely do it this way again. It meant that I didn't have to have any power tools and I could still get a really strong structure that's the shape that I wanted it to be. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below and let me know if you plan on building your own foam board dollhouse. I hope you all have an amazing week and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. And I'm going to mix the paint with, thank you, so that are actually sitting on the floor of oops.
You couldn't fit in the house. You're so small.
We gotta get started on the next one. You're doing all the windows, so I hope you've been studying.